Boom. There it is. It's officially begun. It's like the Olympics. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Here are the top headlines at this very moment from all across the Twitter sphere. And there's actually a little more than 10 at the moment. The very biggest tweet at this moment, the most tweeted tech news related link, is Intel says its foundry services will build chips for Qualcomm and Amazon Web Services, and lays out a roadmap to catch up with TSMC and Samsung by 2025. Call me skeptical. But I'm assuming that means they have their quarterly earnings report, because that kind of an announcement is the kind of an announcement you make at the end of your report when you do the kind of call with the investors and you start making very bold promises. So somebody can check me on that. Did Intel just do their quarterly earnings report? Oh, no, they did their quarterly earnings reports like 2 days ago. Huh. Anyway, so from Reuters and many other people reporting that Intel said on Monday its factories will start building Qualcomm chips and laid out a roadmap to expand its new foundry business. We know they're making new factories down in Arizona, I guess Mesa, Arizona, and chips for Qualcomm and Amazon Web Services, and lays out a roadmap to catch up with TSMC, and that would be nice. That would be fantastic, and then we wouldn't, be dependent on TSMC, internationally or anywhere internationally for chips. And Apple, most of all, would love that, because then they could have U.S. made chips right down the street, because they, like all of the most cutting edge devices, use cutting edge chips from TSMC in Taipei, Taiwan, which is fine. They seem very lovely people. There's never, yeah, Chris.
The kind of cool thing is that they're talking about ARM chips being used in servers, which wasn't really something that happened a couple years ago. Intel is now making ARM chips for servers instead of their standard x86 or x64 chips, which is a big step forward. I mean, essentially we're all seeing this journey to ARM. If you have a MacBook Air, if you have an M1 enabled Apple device, you're kind of seeing what the next generation processors are able to do in that environment, and they're leveraging that in the servers now, which is interesting.
It says Intel. Go ahead, Cal.
Oh, no. I was just going to ask, other than capital and skills, which we have in the US and other countries have, this is like a no-brainer, right? It's like we just didn't do it. I'm sure it's easy to move the capacity to the US, right? Is there something I'm missing that Taiwan has yeah?
Oh, in terms of just the innovation,
competitive advantage.
Not anymore, because one of the blogs that covered this says that Intel detailed revised roadmap with plans for a 1 nanometer chips and beyond in 2025, which would put it. I mean, TSMC is at 3 nanometer. Intel is apparently at 5 nanometers, and then they say they have a plan to get down to 1 nanometer by 2025. Then I don't see what the big difference would be. Intel to manufacture chips for Qualcomm, Amazon, and plays catch up with TSMC. That's the big report. And Qualcomm's, that's a huge customer. That's one of the world's biggest customers you could have as a chip manufacturer. And Amazon Web Services, I imagine, could be as well. So it'll be interesting to see how the Intel stock performs henceforth.
Yeah, because that's all the Snapdragon chips, likely. Those are all the chips that go into the phones too. That was where Intel missed the boat, was when they had a chance to get into the mobile phone market. They stayed with the big processor.
To add, they may have gotten the deal, but they have to make sure they deliver. To process semiconductor is not so straightforward. There's also yield and a lot of other aspects to see whether they are really able to make it happen. TSMC is very, very, very at a different league. So if Intel wants to be in the game, they better They better really do a good job, because if not, they will screw it up. I think this Qualcomm deal is very likely is also a strategic decision.
Yeah, like
Because
geopolitical. Like
yes,
it
yes,
sound
it's more that.
yeah, because getting Qualcomm into and then the other big one would be Apple, and the it's interesting. Perhaps the White House and at that emergency meeting that they had about semiconductors, I have to imagine they all sort of agreed. You know what, we gotta do what we can to reduce our dependency on any international supplier. No offense to Taiwan at all. I mean, I think Taiwan's been a fantastic partner, but I think just the concept is we need to start internalizing everything, because even if Taiwan's the best partner in the world, you still have to send it over on a boat across an ocean, and that's very expensive. In a context where things get where you start getting into regular conflicts on the oceans, you would it would be much better if you had everything within your own borders. And I mention that because, as I'm fond of reminding everybody to read Peter Zeihan's Disunited Nations, that's what the big concern is all about, is that there's going to be a very dramatic decrease in who's going to be able to do importing and exporting. And we're going to bring everything back in, all of the key stuff, to limit our dependencies. And everybody's going to try and do that. And some countries are going to be able to do that and some are not. Because some countries don't have water or food or energy, and those are kind of hard to bring back. So it's going to be very interesting. But if you are interested in how it's going to play out, the best source I've seen, and if you know of a better one, let me know. But Disunited Nations, you can YouTube it and see all kind. You can watch them do a PowerPoint version of the book for you in very visual form, which I love watching those. So the second biggest story is that Samsung confirms that it won't launch Galaxy Note at its Unpacked event on August 11th. Says it will launch new Galaxy Z phones and an S Pen designed for foldables. The company also promises enhanced durability. Samsung isn't looking to have many surprises at its August 11th Unpacked event, which is no doubt very music to the ears of Apple, because they have their event a month later in September, where they will announce their new iPhone, as they do every year. And they've got everybody, myself included, on pins and needles to see if they're going to release their augmented reality, virtual reality headset at that event. And let's ping in not Nicholas Lyons, who's on stage, but the Nicholas in Stockholm, who is most likely to know the answer to that. So just a quick little ping there. Let's see if the other Nicholas can join us real fast. And, well, I don't see him in the ping list. Okay, so the next biggest article is number 3. Apple updates its iOS, the operating system for the iPhone, the iPad OS, the operating system for the iPad, and the Mac OS, the operating system for your laptop or desktop, to address a 0-day flaw that was reportedly actively exploited, making it the 13th 0-day Apple has patched this year. Holy cow, I did not know that. Wow.
So around May last year, I was watching this, and what they were saying is that the market for 0-day exploit, the price for iOS and Apple devices had dropped dramatically, indicating there was like a ton of supply. So this is what we're actually seeing unfolding right now.
Yeah, but this is say that again, Chris. I'm sorry.
So, like, there's a marketplace for exploits,
Yes.
and it's a way of being able to track which operating systems are secure, because the most expensive exploits are the most safe operating systems. So
Right.
or at some point last year, Android became the most expensive exploit, and iOS dropped to the second, because there were just so many new exploits that were suddenly on the market, and there weren't as many for Android. So what I'm saying is, Apple traditionally is, like, considered a very secure hard to penetrate platform. But
Yep.
last year, the kind of the hacker market was indicating that the exploits were widely available for iOS.
Right.
So you said 13, so 13 zero-day exploits. That's a big deal.
That's a huge deal. That means if you
Everything's owned, everything's pwned, nothing belongs to you.
Apple has released patches. The company has explained one tracked as Apple said the 0-day impacts a kernel extension that allows developers to control how devices memory handles the screen display and the screen frame buffer, to be more exact, according to the Apple. That's kind of really geeky, boring stuff. But the headline certainly is not boring at all. While there's plenty solid chance that this 0-day might be a new exploit used by iOS jailbreaking community to root iPhones, it's also unclear if today's 0-day is in any way related to the NSO Group, an Israeli company that sells iPhones hacking tools to governments around the world, and who recently at the center of a large number of investigative reports that have exposed some of its past hacking. And yeah, indeed. Today's patches mark the 13th 0-day Apple has patched this year. Previous 0-days include, and there's a schedule on this where they show on February 1st, there was one across every device they make: Mac OS, iOS, iPadOS, watchOS, and tvOS. Holy cow. Then on February 1, there was a WebKit 0-day on all the devices. And then on March 26th, and April 26th, and May 3rd, and May 24th, and June 14th. Youch. Got to get those holes plugged up. So I'm going to tweet that out to the Tech News Twitter account so you can see that schedule of
And a
these days.
lot of these things probably have been around for a long time because Apple's built on, Linux type technology, FreeBSD or whatever it's called. So, like a lot of them are like just things that have, like for example, with Windows, and I know that's a different operating system, but the print spooler is now the big problem for them, and that's got to be like a 20-year-old piece of software that's been utilized for a long time. So I'm curious, like how long these devices have been secretly monitored.
Mm-hmm. So Faraz just sent in an article that related to Facebook and Apple. We were talking about VR and AR, and this article from Bloomberg says that Facebook explores integrating Oculus workouts with Apple Health. I don't believe that myself. Oculus could, I can't believe Facebook would ever explore integrating Oculus with anything to do with Apple. Oculus could let users store workout data in iPhone Health app. Oculus Move lets users see calories burned in virtual reality. And that is one of the use cases that about VR that's often not mentioned, which is the ability to be in a virtual class, like a Heyman's Jazzercise class, where everyone's going to jump up and down and sweat themselves silly, and you could do it socially as a group or individually with an AI trainer. You could even have a weight trainer or yoga. You could do VR yoga. That's coming. What are yoga teachers going to do when there's VR yoga? Amay, you must have heard of this. VR yoga? Vroga for short.
Vroga.
So I'm not a
Vroga,
yoga
yeah.
instructor, but I have noticed, and I don't really even work out, but I have noticed that people are doing online classes. So, I mean, I don't think it's too far of a stretch.
Well, there's another. I'm going to skip to the 10th biggest article of the moment because it is also VR related, and it says Facebook announces metaverse product group headed by Instagram's VP Vishal Shah. Facebook is all in on the metaverse. The social media giant is reorganizing itself to build out a new metaverse product group that will be headed by Vishal Shah, Instagram's current VP of product. Other key executives of the group include Facebook gaming VP Vivek Sharma. And that's starting to give you a little bit of a hint of how many Indians work in Silicon Valley, who will be leading the development of the company's Horizons VR world, and Facebook gaming executive Jason Rubin, who previously led content for Oculus. The new group is reported to is reporting to Facebook's VP of A&R and VR, Andrew Bosworth, who announced the founding of his Facebook, who announced the founding of this on his Facebook page Monday afternoon. To achieve our full vision of the metaverse, we need to build the connective tissue between these spaces so you can remove the limitations of physics and move between them with the same ease as moving from one room in your home to the next. Bosworth wrote, to focus our efforts and deliver on this vision, we are bringing together the teams that have been driving some of this fundamental work. And indeed, it took a while for the apps on the iPhone to start working and playing friendly with each other. If when you click on somebody tweets a Facebook post, and if you click on the tweet, that it takes you to the Facebook post. That surprisingly took several years, even after the iPhone had come out, for that to even happen, even though Twitter was pointing to the right place. But to get the apps to open each other directly took a bit of time, and that's an interesting element with VR, where VR is unique in that it's both kind of apps inside of a platform and web pages inside of a platform. Both, like your phone has both apps and web pages, but getting them all to play friendly with each other so that the link in your browser goes to the right app to open it, or that the link in the app goes to the other correct app, or to the right web page, and all this, getting all of that interoperability. And it gets even crazier because in VR, you now have your own kind of you exists virtually in that space, like as an avatar, and your avatar is going to move from app to app. And the question is, will your avatar stay the same, or will it change from app to app? Because currently in your phone, you do have avatars like you have here in Clubhouse, and when you go to a different app, your photo changes often, and it's a different account. But what happens with your different accounts and these different apps in this different platform called VR or AR? And what happens to your avatar as you move from app to app? And here's Nicholas. Fantastic. So, Nicholas, if you could jump up on stage, we have a couple questions for you, my friend, about how VR and AR are shaping up. And if you could jump up here, where's Nicholas?
Hello.
Hey, good hello, good morning, sir. So, is there any update on the rumor, the likelihood of Apple releasing something, as they normally do their September event to reveal the new iPhone, that they will
Yeah,
also?
and the latest word on that from Robert Scoble, who's the most active rumor starter in that space, is next year's WWDC. He
Oh
says
my
now they
God!
will launch the, yeah. So he's moving the goalposts, but he's really the only guy who's putting any dates on this. And the other information that we have is that, yeah, they are working on it. It will come. I can't imagine that they are accelerating their launch plans based on what Facebook and others are doing, but
Right.
it'll come.
Well, there was a headline just a minute ago that Facebook explores integrating Oculus workouts with Apple Health. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking the only way they would even entertain that idea, confident that they were way ahead of Apple's VR plans. Which
Yeah,
now that
they did create a fitness tracking layer for their own like VR in-app movement tracking data, so you can get your calories counted and steps counted there. So they have an API for that, and it's a triviality to integrate that with Apple Health, I imagine, and just like they will probably do with Google Health, their
right,
corresponding version. But yeah, that's all part of what you're talking about with this metaverse interoperability
right,
issue. The biggest thing there, I think, you have already also talked about the Ready Player Me avatars, haven't you?
yes,
And the Avatar Hub, because I
yes,
think things like that really play into this interoperability layer.
right. And then there needs to be a financial interoperability layer as well to some degree. Hopefully it'll be better than what we have on phones.
Yeah, I mean those are the layers that are being built with or without VR, right?
Right.
So the VR AR specific things are things like identity,
Yeah.
portable identity.
Yeah. Do you think, will there be some potential reasons to do, because everybody's going to be an avatar, as kind of a caricature of themselves instead of an actual photo of themselves, like we have become accustomed to here in Clubhouse and Facebook and other places, that would enhance the possibility of some pressure to, uh, governments would ask the platforms to make sure that the users are verified in some kind of way?
So, in line with what Facebook is doing with tying users to real identity data, they have the internal avatar project called Codec Avatars. Wired made a write-up on it a couple of years ago, and it's photorealistic avatars. So right now they're using super advanced capture rigs to do individual captures and everything it needs to. But they're of course feeding that into machine learning, so it's going to take like 2 to 6 sensors on the VR headset itself to make and animate a photorealistic avatar. And if you look at the research that they're doing continuously, it's pretty amazing stuff. And I imagine that that's going to be one of the USPs with hooking up to the Facebook centralized metaverse hub. I mean, the metaverse will still be the overarching layer that connects everything, but Facebook will really have a dominant position in this from
Right.
what it looks like.
Well, even in
And
this article that I just read, it says Zuckerberg called the metaverse, quote unquote, the successor to the mobile internet, and pledged to turn Facebook from a social media company into a metaverse company. However, Facebook's own efforts to build the metaverse have been mixed at best. The company's social VR apps have gone through multiple iterations without ever getting much traction. Horizon, which has been built on the company's big social VR bet for the Quest, has been in internal and invite-only testing ever since its announcement nearly 2 years ago.
yeah, I think that the metaverse is a new hook to put what they have been building for like since the start of buying Oculus, which is the new spatial computing platform, the computing platform that is the successor to mobile. So it's not only the mobile internet, but they're laying the groundwork with the hardware first, and the infrastructure comes after the hardware.
Right. And then the building of this new group inside of Facebook, they say they plan to employ hundreds of new people in this group. And as I said, yeah, this VR is, you could think of it as the next era. Zuckerberg calls it the successor to the mobile internet. I refer to it, yeah, similarly, that we had the desktop era and then the smartphone era. And now we're going to have the metaverse era.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting. Another really interesting note. I'm going to tweet this article out for a whole totally different reason than I normally do, because the ad that I'm seeing on this article, there's a big ad right in the middle of the article. It says sponsored content. The new wave of global trade. How Alipay connects U.S. businesses with Chinese customers. From Ant Group and Alipay, Ant Group Alipay, presented by Ant Group Alipay. That's kind of interesting because we spent a good party yesterday talking about precisely that and how Ant Group Alipay is now, the headline 24 hours ago was that China is essentially forcing Alipay to adopt the Chinese state digital currency. And that it's in a test right now, and no doubt that test will go very well. And then they're going to tell Alipay, yeah, you have a whole new, we are replacing your existing payment protocols with the central bank digital currency inside of not only Alipay, but WeChat Pay, who's also named as a partner in this new test. So seeing this ad that says the new wave of global trade, how Alipay connects U.S. businesses with Chinese customers, and it shows a business, like a cafe, like a cafe, and the person at the cash register, the employee, is scanning the person's phone, and the person's showing their phone like they do, because that's how it works with Alipay. Is when you pay with Alipay, you just say, I'm ready to pay. A QR code comes up on your phone and you show it to the shop, and then the shop scans it with a QR code reader, and that's how you pay. And so there's a little photo of that. I wonder if people are seeing the same ad if they open the article
No,
about
I
Facebook Metaverse.
I'm seeing Trello.
Yeah, I see Trello as
I'm not
well.
seeing, yeah, but
Yeah.
the first one is, it keeps changing.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. It's probably because you've been looking into these things, Tyler, that it's
Yeah,
being shown to you.
Yeah.
yeah.
But
Must be the algorithm.
the interesting bit is we don't really have Alipay in the U.S., and this is the new
Now
wave of
it's
how Alipay connects U.S. businesses with Chinese customers so that we can accept their central bank digital currencies. It's a very interesting
Are they targeting
concept.
American
Yes.
for the data?
Well,
I
the
didn't see Alipay. I didn't see Alipay.
Alipay is promoting itself to U.S. businesses so that they can do business with Chinese customers. Anyway, it's very interesting. So, next biggest headline at the moment, we skipped over a couple to get down.
Just as a side, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I think I put this headline out. I put it out again, but just as they were the biggest sponsor of the this European Cup, right? The European Football Cup, Soccer Cup.
Oh, they were
And
Alipay.
yeah, big. There's a headline. I'll send it out again, but they were all over it. I mean, even when we were watching it here in the UK, all over the screens, it was Alipay. And I was curious at that time, like, why are they promoting this thing? And there's a couple of articles on it, and they just, there's a couple of views. One is just getting a good feeling about China, but the other is like, literally, I'm like suspecting, like, well, are they expecting to expand into Europe? And certainly in the UK, they've been promoting Alipay quite a lot. China, generally speaking, has been targeting the UK since Brexit, big time. Chinese businesses, Chinese officials are always visiting here. They're visiting the universities, collaborations between universities. So I thought, maybe it's just part of that. But I'll send it out again. It's very interesting. They were the
We
key sponsor.
we had a headline yesterday about a little collaboration between the Harvard's chair of chemistry and his interesting collaboration with China, which he's now going to jail about. But yeah. While we have Nicholas on stage, the other Nicholas, we had read an article about 3 days ago about was it called Authentic ID or Authenticate ID, raised a bunch of money. It seemed like they had a identity verification system that they were, it was automated. It seems identical to Stripe's identity new offering. Wondering if you saw that or happen to know anything about that company, or if you caught that.
Yeah, well, the short answer is if it's a company and it's raising money, then you know that their interest is the shareholders owning your ID, and that's the hallmark. So,
yeah, here it is. There's still articles coming out from 12 hours ago on this. Identity authentication and fraud prevention company called Authentic ID lands $100 million in funding, and I'm trying to remember who was backing it. So we'll open the Seattle-based Authentic ID lands $100 million in a minority investment from Long Ridge Equity Partners, providing identity proofing to U.S. wireless carriers, banks, credit bureaus, and other large enterprise companies. Customers use cases include age verification, fraud detection, application onboarding, that's the word you were looking for, biometrics, and more. Have 65 employees, according to LinkedIn, and is led by CEO Jeff Johnny, who joined the company in 2017 after a 20-year stint with Next Gen Strategy. Other identification verification companies in the Pacific Northwest include Sheer ID and Auth0, which was acquired by Okta earlier this year for $6.5 billion. So now that we've got the CEO's name here, let's try and reach out to Authentic ID's CEO to see if he'll jump in here and tell us if he thinks the that regular apps on our phone and whatnot will, in the near future, be doing identity verification through state IDs and by a combination of biometrics and state IDs.
It's absolutely certain that that's going to happen, Tyler. It's absolutely certain. The only question is whether you're going to be monetized by a company like theirs, or OAuth or Okta or any other private company, and that could include Stripe and or Facebook, or whether it's going to be self-sovereign and that we're going to own those entities, and it's going to be decentralized on a public blockchain and issued by a public blockchain. And that's going to be the the line in the sand. And it's great to hear about these companies. It shows that people care about identity. But if you're going to build an identity business and raise money, that means you've got shareholders, which means that you have to make money from those identities, which means that you have to monetize your customers, which means that they're going to make money and you're not. That's not going to be good for the individual.
How will the decentralized equivalent be able to is there a potential jujitsu move if that does happen? How do you imagine it will play out that people will insist? I'm just trying to imagine how you imagine that it will go down kind of chronologically.
The jujitsu move.
Yeah.
The jujitsu move in terms of privacy, or the jujitsu move in terms of
adoption?
Adoption. Well, the jiu-jitsu move in terms of adoption is that all of the people that are in the identity business, that $6 billion valuation you heard about, and all of the fields of data, the jiu-jitsu move is if it's owned by you, then you're going to be owners of the multi-trillion-dollar networks of the future versus Google, Facebook, Amazon, and the identity companies, right? So that's the promise of the blockchain truly. And cryptography is that those multi-trillion-dollar market caps go to the communities, and so that's the jiu-jitsu move number one. Jiu-jitsu move number two is if you use what's the latest in cryptography, which is known as zero-knowledge proofs, you can provide all of that data completely verifiably, but with total privacy, where you keep control of the base information and you provide proofs of all the information that is currently stored with everybody else, rather than letting them sit with your data. And so those are the two jiu-jitsu moves which the public can pull on the technocracy.
Okay. Where are we at? We went 1, 2, 3, and then number 4. About 1,000 current and former Activision Blizzard employees say that the company's response to the recent lawsuit is insulting in a letter to the leadership. Oh boy, I told you this was going to be a drama. This was going to be an ongoing thing. So here it is. It started out with just a few days ago, 2 or 3 days ago, that Blizzard, which makes World of Warcraft and other incredibly huge games, there's a lawsuit filed for sexual discrimination and sexual harassment. And then internally, the CEO and some other senior executive at the company said, this is inaccurate and it paints a bad light on the company, etc. And now the new headline is that nearly 1,000 current and former Activision employees have signed a letter calling the company's response to a recent discrimination lawsuit abhorrent and insulting. The new letter, which was reviewed by Bloomberg, was circulated Monday following a turbulent week for the publisher behind Call of Duty and World of Warcraft, which are two of the biggest video games in all of video game history, by the way. It's and then the rest of the article's paywalled, unfortunately. But I'm going to tweet that one out, and I'm sure there's a lot of people covering this other than Bloomberg, I imagine, even though they say they had a look at the letter. I imagine they're not the only ones. And because I believe the employees who signed the letter probably reached out to the press to let them know that this was happening. And indeed, that seems to be the case. because the Washington Post actually has actual screenshots of the actual letter. So that's how you know what's going on here, is that the employees are doing a bit of a PR move here, because they are reaching out to the press rather than the other way around. It says Activision Blizzard staff rebuke insulting leadership response to the discrimination suit. And here's the actual bits of the letter, where it says, we stand with our friends, teammates, and colleagues, as well as other teammates and dedicated community who have experienced mistreatment or harassment, and we will not be silenced. We will not stand aside. We will not give up until the workplace can feel proud to be part again. And we believe these statements have damaged our ongoing quest for equality inside and outside of our industry, categorizing the claims that have been made as distorted. And that's what the senior leadership said, was this is a distorted view of our company to say that we have sexual harassment or sexual discrimination. And so categorizing the claims that have been made as distorted and in many cases false creates a company atmosphere that disbelieves victims. It also casts doubt on our organization's ability to hold abusers accountable for their actions and foster a safe environment for victims to come forward in the future. These statements make it clear that our leadership is not putting our values first. Immediate corrections are needed from the highest level of our organization. And now it says more than 1,600 current and former staff and video game publishing company Activision Blizzard sent a sternly worded open letter Monday rebuking the company's leadership for what was they perceived to be as an abhorrent and insulting response to recent discrimination and sexual harassment lawsuit. The suit, filed by the state of California Department for Fair Employment and Housing against Activision Blizzard on July 20th in LA Superior Court, alleges multiple instances of discrimination, inequality, and harassment against women throughout Activision Blizzard network of companies. The letter specifically addressed both the company's public statement issued last week saying that the claims in the suit were distorted and in many cases false, as well as an email sent from Chief Compliance Officer Francis Townsend to Activision Blizzard employees stating that the allegations were factually incorrect, old, and out of context. And to be continued. This is going to be a huge lawsuit. Wild. Interesting move by everyone to respond. Well, first, the lawsuit was sent, and then the company, I guess somewhat understandably, says, as is very common, this is inaccurate, and we will prove this wrong in court. And now to collect signatures of 1,600 current and former employees, and then send that out to the press to say, we as the employees rebuke your rebuke. It's like a tennis match of PR moves here. That's a kind of a new level that you don't normally see, the counter response to the response to the lawsuit. But interesting move. I assume their lawyers were part of the approving that. Very interesting. Okay. So no doubt we will get further updates about that. That is far from over. A lot of juice left in that lemon. So a look at ShotSpotter, which uses sensors to detect gunshots. As court filings suggest, it frequently alters evidence at the request of police departments. What is this about? Prosecutors in Chicago are being forced to withdraw evidence generated by the technology which led to the police killing of somebody. And this is from Vice. It says prosecutors in Chicago are being forced to withdraw evidence generated by the technology which led to the police killing of a 13-year-old Adam Toledo earlier this year. On May 31st last year, a 25-year-old Safran Herring was shot in the head and dropped off at St. Bernard's Hospital in Chicago by a man named Michael Williams. He died 2 days later. Chicago police eventually arrested the 64-year-old Williams and charged him with murder. Williams maintains that Herring was hit in a drive-by shooting. The key piece of evidence in the case is video surveillance footage showing Williams's car stopped on the 6300 block of South Stony Island Avenue at 11:46 p.m., the time and location where police say they know Herring was shot. Well, how would they know? How did they? That's the next paragraph. How did they know that's where the shooting happened? Police said ShotSpotter, a surveillance system that uses hidden microphone sensors to detect the sound and location of gunshots, generated an alert for that time and place. Except that's not entirely true, according to recent court filings. That night, 19 ShotSpotter sensors detected a percussive sound at 11:46 p.m. and determined the location to be the 5700 block South Lakeshore Drive, a mile away from the site where prosecutors say Williams committed the murder. According to a motion filed by Williams' public defender, the company's algorithms initially classified the sound as a firework. That weekend had seen widespread protests in Chicago in response to George Floyd's murder, and some of those protests lit fireworks. But after the 11:46 p.m. alert came in, a ShotSpotter analysis manually overrode the algorithms and reclassified the sound as a gunshot. Then, months later, after post-processing, another ShotSpotter analysis changed the alert's coordinates to a location on South Stony Island Drive near where Williams' car was seen in the camera. Oh boy, this is getting juicy here. Hold on, where's the sound effects? Where is my suspense? Here we go. This is getting kind of weird here. So, where did we leave off? When we last left off, hearing was shot. How did they know? But after ShotSpotter analysis manually overrode the algorithm now twice. Once to reclassify it from a firework to a gunshot, and then a second time moving the location a mile away to where the murder happened. Through this human-involved method, the ShotSpotter output in this case was dramatically transformed from data that did not support criminal charges of any kind to data that now forms the centerpiece of the prosecution's murder case against Mr. Williams, the public defender wrote in the motion. The document is what's known as a Fry motion, a request for a judge to examine and rule on whether a particular forensic method is scientifically valid enough to be entered as evidence. Rather than defend ShotSpotter's technology and its employees' actions in a Fry hearing, the prosecutors withdrew all ShotSpotter evidence against Williams. Wow. The case isn't an anomaly, and the pattern it represents could have huge ramifications for a ShotSpotter in Chicago, where the technology generates an average of 21,000 alerts each year. The technology is also currently in use in more than 100 cities. Motherboard's review of court documents from the Williams case and other trials in Chicago and New York State, including testimony from ShotSpotter's favored expert witness, suggests that the company's analysts frequently modify alerts at the request of police departments. Oh my goodness. Some of which appear to be grasping for evidence that supports the narrative of their events. Oh boy. Data gone bad. And the article goes on, but I'm going to tweet this out. That's wild. Holy cow. And this is, anyone want to jump in on this? It's clearly important to understand, the power of data and who's controlling the data. And in this case, the police were asking the data company to manipulate the data, which was being used in charging people with murder cases. Holy cow. That's wild.
It is, Tyler.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, unfortunately, it's not shocking for me, because there are so many people who are, who've been imprisoned wrongfully where, the evidence has been patched together. I think the difference is that now it's just that much more sophisticated in terms of how data is being used. 50 years ago, there wasn't the technology to be able to prove it. And so I think that it comes down to the core of, the ethics that goes into investigating certain types of crimes.
Yeah, the interesting bit is because it's not a camera, it's just a microphone, it's more easily manipulatable, I guess you could say. Like if it was a camera, the problem is cameras only look in one direction. I guess we're going to see a boom of 360 cameras, which will have microphones. it's really interesting. There was somebody pitched me this same idea and didn't reveal that this was a competitor. And I think I even asked them if they have competitors, which obviously they clearly do, because this is it. It's like audio for cities, almost like an Alexa for a city, where it was precisely this. This is what they pitched me. I didn't realize this is a popular solution with 100 different cities as customers and being used by police departments. I wonder what these little microphones look like. That wild. I honestly wasn't. How many people were aware that this existed? ShotSpotter, these microphones in 100 cities, being analyzing gunshot sounds or other alarming sounds that then notify the police departments, giving the
No,
police
I didn't. No, no
essentially
clue.
ears. Yeah,
No clue. Right.
it's
But
kind of super wild, because if you put in cameras, I guess it changes the behavior of people in those areas, and there's all kinds of issues. But a microphone can be tiny, 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 and you put in a little microphone, no one's even going to know. And what if they're listening to conversations? That's wild. Holy cow. ShotSpotter. Let's check this out. ShotSpotter.com. ShotSpotter. What is this? ShotSpotter.com. That's the website, and they have a Twitter account. And then I see now other headlines related to ShotSpotter. I guess it's really popular in Chicago. It says ABC 7 in America says no crimes reported by Chicago police after 86% of ShotSpotter gunfire alerts. Well, no doubt, because you don't have any information other than a gunshot happened. So, if you can't really do much unless you see who did it. As the country grapples with racial inequality in policing, an I-Team data investigation looked at technology designed to detect gunfire called ShotSpotter. Chicago police were responding to a ShotSpotter alert when they rushed to the Little Village block where they found Adam Toledo. It's about the Adam Toledo case again. Police shot and killed 13-year-old after he ran from officers. And wow.
hey, Charles, we're just figuring out that everyone's listening to us using microphones.
ShotSpotter. Have you heard of ShotSpotter?
I have. It doesn't work as well as advertised.
Yeah, apparently, because there's another problem, which is there's a court case happening now where the ShotSpotter data, according to the hardware, meaning the microphones, tracked the sound to one location. A mile away from where the app said that the sound happened, there was somebody did get shot in a drive-by a mile away. The app originally identified the sound as a firework, and then a human went in and edited it and said it was a gunshot, and then another human went in again and edited the location to match the location of where the person got shot by the drive-by, and that's being used in the court case to charge somebody else who, bringing kind of heavy evidence against somebody, and they're saying, we have this app here that showed us, a gunshot happened right here at this time at this place. And then when they looked deeper into it, they're like, actually, no, your app originally said the sound happened a mile away and that it was a firework. And so they're throwing out the evidence from ShotSpotter. So really interesting that, and all of these instances that we're looking at are about Chicago at the moment, but they claim to be in over 100 cities. And on their website, they say ShotSpotter's precision policing platform contributes to positive outcomes. That's kind of their big headline. And it says a 33% decrease in gunfire in Fort Myers in 2020, improvement of homicide clearance rate pre versus post deployment in some unnamed large city. That's it, just says large city. And then green.
Yeah, there's a view that I have to be careful what I say here because I am helping the government on dealing with ShotSpotter, so I have to be somewhat careful. But there's a view that ShotSpotter is, in fact, listening to things other than shots fired.
I just said that. I said they could be listening to conversations.
Yeah, I don't know if they're listening in conversations, but it's let's just put it this way. when I looked at investing in ShotSpotter a while back, it did not pass basic American security review. Just put it that way. So how it's been able to get everywhere to all the law enforcement folks, that is a very interesting question, one worth examining, and I hope that is ultimately examined.
Well,
That's probably all I can say about that.
It's particularly interesting when you combine ShotSpotter with Ring, because Ring cameras historically were known to be kind of in bed with police departments, whether the buyers of the Ring cameras knew it or not. And if you combine those two, it gets very interesting.
Well, Ring, of course, was set up a while back and acquired by Amazon.
Right.
And when it was acquired by Amazon, a lot of the more nefarious folks were supposedly cleaned out of Ring.
Mm-hmm.
So, Ring passed the security review back when this was going on. ShotSpotter did not. So various people looked at acquiring ShotSpotter, investing in ShotSpotter, that sort of thing, and it failed all those reviews. From my recollection of it, it's now been seems like it's been 10 years, but in COVID times, it was probably like last week when I last looked at this.
It says on their website, it says the platform is highly data-driven and includes community protections and engagement opportunities to help improve police-community relations. And yeah, it's all about gunshot detection, investigative case management, improve case clearance rates for all crime types, analytical and collaboration tools reduce time to solvability, build courtroom-ready cases. Oh boy. And patrol management, gain insight into officer activity, deter crime, and improve community engagement, automate directed patrol planning for highest impact. So you can reallocate your police resources based on where historical data shows where gunfires are happening. And in that case, okay, that's kind of smart. And yeah, it might expedite the ability for police to get to an area if they hear multiple gunshots and nobody's calling 911, as I imagine might happen in some parts of the U.S. And so they're able to get in there. Okay, that's great. But then when they start using the data in court, that's where it gets a little tricky. Anyway, really interesting concept. I was not aware that this existed, except I just got pitched by a competitor of this, and they wanted to use it in Europe. And they didn't mention ShotSpotter as part of their pitch, which is kind of I'm curious why they wouldn't. If ShotSpotter is being used by 100 cities, they'd probably have good revenue. Anyway, very interesting. So the next headline that we're on to at this very moment is that Google issues a new enterprise APIs policy promising that APIs will remain available far into the future, aiming to move past a reputation of killing services. And this is, as any dev on stage knows, that is an incredibly painful part of being a developer, is when you build your tools or products or services on top of other platforms' APIs, and then they kill those APIs. And one of the most egregious examples of this was when Twitter was encouraging everyone to build, their own apps and analytics platforms around Twitter. So Twitter was providing data, which are APIs. The APIs are kind of the pipes that provide the data. And they provide all kinds of different pipes. So they can give you a pipe to let you know, in the case of Twitter, the photos of the user accounts or the user information, which is your bio, or the actual tweets themselves. That would be a separate pipe, a separate API. And then they have, dozens of APIs actually. And lots of platforms do. And there's lots of good reasons why platforms give out data in these kinds of ways. So wow, I just got a DM that is just added a whole bunch of new fuel to the fire about ShotSpotter. Apparently somebody in the audience sent me a DM here that ShotSpotter is Israeli, which I could see how this could be used in the region, in the Middle East, especially around Israel, and how I can imagine how Israel would use this within Israel. And on the heels of Pegasus, of what's going on with Pegasus, that adds a whole new dimension, does it not, to ShotSpotter? Because that platform can easily be hacked, or ShotSpotter could be selling access. Well, they are selling access to the microphones, but they might be selling access to governments rather than that gets really wild very quickly. And if it says an Israeli intelligence collection operation, like their facial recognition system, like their, which is AnyVision, or like Pegasus, you have to imagine that the state also has access to all of this data and audio of all of the microphones coming through this system as it's deployed in 100 American cities. Where is that sound file? Oh, there it is. That's holy cow. Hey, journalists, you might want to look into that. You might want to look into that. Just a tip. Holy smokes. ShotSpotter's Israeli intelligence tech. Oh boy. Oh boy. Well, I guess we broke a little. We need to verify it, but somebody might want to check on that. Maybe Johan would be the perfect person to check on that. Wow.
Yeah, Charles's silence on this is also very indicative as well. You know what I'm saying?
So, what else do we got here? We've got the next big story. About the APIs. Yeah, Google's now saying they're going to keep their API. The problem is when APIs get shut down from time to time, and if you built your product or service on top of a platform's APIs, and those APIs stop, as they often do, well, then your business ends. And that happened to a lot of people who build a lot of products and services on top of Twitter, like analytics things and enterprise dashboards, so you could see all of your Twitter accounts in one place and do all kinds of interesting data stuff with Twitter. And they all got shut down instantly. And Twitter's like, you know what? No more APIs. Never mind. And so you got to be really careful about that. And as every developer knows, and so Google is now promising that the new enterprise APIs are promising that the APIs will remain available far into the future, meaning you can build a business on them, aiming to move past a reputation for killing its services. So that's good. And then we covered the Facebook metaverse headline. And now the next big headline is that Spotify adds a What's New feed on iOS and Android, so on the mobile apps, showing continuously updating new releases from followed artists rolling out over the coming weeks. So it's kind of like a Twitter feed for all of the artists you follow on Spotify. But the tweets are more specific about what they are up to, what the artists are, releasing, content. Because in the future, artists will release songs as individual songs and not as albums, because due to the streaming apps, the concept of an album is thoroughly, effectively dead for the most part. And so artists release songs when they record them. And now that'll be kind of a tweet feature. Now, why that's interesting is because this could you do follow artists on Spotify. And you can see this. They made a little movie of this on the web page that I just tweeted out to the Tech News Twitter account at TNATW, where it says Spotify is introducing a feature to notify people when their favorite artists and podcast producers, that's another great use case, have a new release to check out. Taking the form of a bell icon you'll find at the top of the app's home interface, the What's New panel collects new releases from bands, musicians, and shows you follow in the platform. Spotify says the feature will update in real time with a blue dot overlay on top of the bell icon to indicate when the panel has been refreshed with new content. Spotify plans to roll out the feature to all mobile phones over the next coming weeks. And they also bought their own carbon copy of Clubhouse. So you could imagine you could follow room creators like Tech News inside of their version of Clubhouse. And when that goes live, it would also give you a notification, because that's now going to become likely to be bundled inside the Mother Spotify app in the near future. And the other interesting bit is, what if they allowed the musicians and podcasters to use it as an alternative to Twitter, where instead of saying that here's a new piece of content that I'm releasing, here's just a message I'm releasing, because you're a fan, you're following me anyways on Spotify. And now you've got one of the first, they've got hundreds of millions of users, almost similar to Twitter in terms of the actual number of monthly active users. So
Correct me if I'm
Yeah,
wrong,
there's
but
that,
does it?
but also,
Oh,
oh,
go
sorry.
ahead, Maria. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
I just want to say that actually the main, I think, benefit from it is that it shortens the time to release for, and then like to make the revenue, right? Because normally they would need to put in a lot of time to record the whole album, and this way, through individual tracks, they can already start monetizing basically every piece of art they make, and get a lot more revenue a lot faster, which is like, a great compounding effect for them. And the other part of it is that the release radar, which is the playlist that Spotify had, is usually pretty shit, to be honest. So this is great because it actually will populate the newest tracks per added date, and will make those feeds very fresh. So that's super cool.
I just wanted to jump in as well and give you the background on ShotStopper. I just did a bit of research. It's actually quoted on NASDAQ, and it makes 15 million in revenue and net income of 80,000 a year. And it was founded back in 2004, and it went public in 2017.
And it's
located in New
incorporated in
York.
Delaware, and it's headquartered in California, so it's not an Israeli company.
No, not
Yeah,
true.
New
It's Gary Lauder is in fact their largest investor, and Gary Lauder is of course close to a number of Israeli technology companies and has talked about it. So there is of
It's a
course
public
an
company.
effort at play in the U.S. to sort of have a binational security arrangements with Israel and with the United States on technology development, and that's sort of changing. You can actually see that there's actually a headline that might be somewhat of interest to people here, which is the mugging of Barbara Boxer, the former U.S. Senator from California, who had her iPhone taken today. Barbara Boxer is, of course, a lobbyist right now, having left office in California, and a very impressive woman in her own right. But she's a lobbyist for two companies, Hikvision, which is banned in the United States for human rights abuses against the Uyghur population, and for one NSO group. So something to think about when you hear about the mugging and taking of her iPhone. And the person, of course, was waiting in a car, which is not, waiting for a car to pick them up to take the phone, which is not typical mugger behavior in Oakland, to put it mildly. So something to think through. But yes, Gary Lauder is actually the main investor in it. A nice guy, by the way, and the technology. So for those who are interested in this, because I just did a little bit of research on this myself. Gary Lauder boasts he was the only investor in ShotSpotter from 2004 to 2005, and as of May 2018, he was the largest he was the largest shareholder. And this is from Forbes in 2016. Of the
You
thousands
can
of
look at the
shots,
proxy statement and get the largest shareholders, and it's not correct.
I
There's a
mean,
firm called Gilder Gagnon that owns 16%. They're the largest shareholder.
all right, this is from Forbes. So I mean,
This is from the most recent proxy statement of a public company. Anybody can look it up. It's called the 14A. It's a proxy form. You can get it on SEC Edgar. It's there.
I'm literally reading from Forbes right
That doesn't
now,
make it right.
where he says in 20. This is before it went public. So of
Oh,
course,
okay. Before it went public. Okay.
yeah, I mean, if it goes public, I mean, you can't really. Obviously, you can pull up the shares then. But of course, we're talking about technology development, not whether or not companies often go public and they dump their bad assets onto the public, which we're seeing a lot with SPACs these days, aren't we? So, but this is interesting. From Forbes in 2016, of the thousands of ShotSpotter alerts in these cities, police were unable to find evidence of gunshots between 30 and 70% of the time. So, not very good tech. Just something interesting.
Newark, California, and 50 to 200 employees. And we could look at all of the. Yeah. Anyway, where were we right before that? ShotSpotter. We were on the Spotify ads, and Marie was talking about the ads, and then we were talking about one other point I want to make on the Spotify thing is, because you were mentioning the single songs, is in the near future. You've no doubt heard me rant, although I'll indulge for those who might be joining us for the first time. Is that in the near future, I'm predicting, and in all transparency, I'm a Spotify shareholder, and the CEO has spoken at my events, where I do my events in Stockholm, and Daniel and Spotify are headquartered in Stockholm. And we may or may not have trained at the gym together on occasion. But the main issue is that I believe Spotify is going to become more than the platform it is today of just streaming songs, and will in the very near future also have, they're going to integrate they have their app, which is like Clubhouse, called the Green Room, and they'll integrate that into their mother app of 200, 300 million users, whatever it is. And as we were talking about already, people already follow artists in Spotify. And when there is rooms like this format of social audio, or what Spotify is calling live audio, that's what they refer to it as. By the way, that's what Facebook also refers to it as, because they have lots of non-live audio, which are songs and podcasts. And now they're going to have live audio, which are rooms like this. And so there is a tab in the Spotify app for music. There's one for podcasts, and now soon there will be one for live audio. And when you click on the live audio tab, it will bring up rooms like the Clubhouse hallway, except it'll likely be pre-populated by those rooms could be shared by all of the followers of Beyonce or Taylor Swift or the Beatles, or pick your favorite artist. And they probably will be listening to songs together. And I believe artists will love that, because they will and they will see the streaming data will be very interesting, because one of the amazing parts about Spotify is how they provide all of the data to the artists in a really cool dashboard, and with tons of data, by the way. And you do, as a podcaster, which uses Spotify's app called Anchor, you also get tons of really cool data as well, which you can see for yourself, which is kind of similar. But the point is when artists start seeing that they're getting a huge explosion in the number of streams of people listening to their songs, because if 1,000 Taylor Swift fans are listening to Taylor Swift songs together, every single play is 1,000 streams. So she will likely see that in her dashboard, and then could very easily join the room, and then could very easily perform in the room. And Spotify has essentially every major artist, and at this point, every minor artist you've never heard of. So they're in a really unique position, and I don't know if it's public yet or not, but the idea of selling.
They said Shopify too.
Right, they did
couple
announce.
Months ago, right?
That's right, they did announce their Shopify partnership, which will then allow the creators on Spotify, which is every musician on the planet, to sell stuff from their accounts. So their Spotify profile will become their e-commerce page, because Metallica's not on Amazon, but Metallica's on Spotify, and Metallica can now sell all of their merchandise, all of their shirts, and they can sell digital merchandise. They could sell actual physical merchandise. They could do tickets for virtual events, like in their live audio rooms. They could do tickets for their actual concerts. And this will put incredible revenue opportunity into the hands of artists in a way that is going to change music industry forever. And I think it's fundamentally amazing. And do I say all this because now with that notification thing that they're announcing today, now I think you understand how that is going to be far more powerful than people understand it today. It's not just, here's your weekly new automatically generated playlist. It's all of the artists that you follow actually have a lot more content and stuff to notify you about. So that's why this notification feature actually has much bigger implications than I think the journalists understand at this point. So,
Tyler?
yes.
Somewhat related, only because Shopify was mentioned, but Shopify is now allowing its partners to sell NFTs
Yes, that was
on
a
its
huge headline in
platform.
the past few hours.
Yeah, I just literally posted that from Decrypt. I was lurking in the background, Tyler and Lakeisha. I posted that. And also a fun one that's related to this. Vitalik, Mila Kunis, and Ashton Kutcher are releasing Stoner Cats. That's going to be really fun. They're releasing an NFT show called Stoner Cats.
You know what's
And
funny
they're going to
about that?
attach themselves. That love Stoner Cats?
No, what's funny about that is
As a TV show, no, they're doing it as TV, which is interesting.
I get that. I first met Ashton in 2007. We're both from LA, and he wanted to launch a show called Blah Blah Girls, which was basically South Park but for girls. And he wanted to launch it. He had a a production house called Catalyst, and in the middle of Hollywood, I recall it was on Melrose, and he wanted to launch it at our event. But although I believe that was 2008 or 9, and was that the one you were at, Cal? The one that Astron launched at?
I was in 3 different ones. So yeah,
Uh-huh.
I was 2008. I was there.
Yeah. So that would have been the one. Both MC Hammer was doing Dance Jam that year, and Ashton Kutcher was doing Blah Blah Girls. Anyway, so Blah Blah Girls was just an animated cartoon, and it didn't really fit with our vision of, that we're an event for launching startups where we pick 50 launching startups and they launch on stage. And he wanted to launch this Blah Blah Girls, but it was going to be digital content, and that's what made it kind of relevant to the tech conference. But he showed up to the event, and of course, all the geeks, we had at that year about 15,000 geeks in the San Francisco Design Center concourse at 8th and Harrison. And he was walking around kind of in a daze that this whole geek community existed. And boy, did he jump in head first. He got on Twitter, and that led to him becoming beating CNN to be the first person with 1 million Twitter accounts, kind of the first big celebrity on Twitter, which he signed up for, if I remember, at the event. And Blah Blah Girls didn't work out, obviously, but he got big into investing in startups in a very big way. And he partnered with Ron Burkle, one of LA's richest individuals who owns all the supermarkets. And actually bought the Ralph's brand from my friends, the Ralphs. And
Ashton rather famously discussed Clearview on the Hot Wings episode where he was being interviewed. Are you familiar with this? The Hot Wings?
No.
Do people know what I'm talking about?
Uh-uh.
There's apparently this show on the internet where they interview celebrities and have them eat very, very spicy foods. And he mentioned Clearview, not by name, but he said that he had an app in his pocket that enabled him to take a picture of anyone and readily identify them. And of course, later the New York Times revealed that was Clearview. So, but yeah, you're quite right. He's in a lot of interesting tech deals.
Yeah, well, here's how it played out. He got together with Ron Burkle, who had billions of dollars, who wanted to invest in tech. And Ashton had a passion for tech, and Ron's a little too busy to meet with startups. And Ashton went around, met with a lot of startups, did a fantastic, got into so many fantastic deals. He really had a good nose for it, and then did so well for it that he figured, I'm making too much money for Ron. I need to go solo. So he made A Grade, and where he hired Chris, and it was him and Guy Osiri, who was Madonna's manager, that were doing that with Ron, and then went separate for A Grade. Anyway, and now they have a new one called Sound. What do they call it? Their new fund, Sound Ventures, and he's really got a great nose for startups, and he's kind of been behind the scenes the whole time. He's a fantastic early stage investor. And anyways, so the fact that he's releasing now another kind of digital content thing
Tyler,
doesn't surprise me. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, but it's super fascinating because there was this I knew for a few days now from the weekend because there was a post on Twitter, I think, or something, or YouTube from Mila Kunis, and Vitalik was over their house having dinner and talking with them, and they had a YouTube about this, and I think it came out about a few days ago.
Yep.
So this decrypt and all this information just came out recently, but they were obviously in discussion over the weekend, and this was what came out of it. I'm super excited because I know I have followed Ashton Kutcher a lot, and I like what he gets involved in, and I think his community, that I think was going to be very, very interesting because Mila Kunis is Russian. So, and Vitalik is also Russian Canadian. So they were both also sort of talking about sort of the NFTs and just joking around and stuff, like how Vitalik showed up in the house of Ashton Kutcher. So it's a very interesting teaser. And then now this comes out. So they're prepping for this, but it's really adorable actually that they have these stoner cats.
Tyler, it's interesting. So, as you were sharing your story, that you mentioned MC Hammer, because I actually learned about this from Hammer's tweet 6 hours ago. So
funny.
Clearly, yeah, I mean, he's still very much wedded to this.
For those who don't know, Hammer hasn't been quite the angel investor that Ashton has. In fact, very few people have become the early stage tech investor that Ashton has. But MC pitched something totally different at our event that year, which was called Dance Jam, which, I shit you not, in 2008, he launched TikTok 10 years too early. And everyone was like, dancing on the internet? Are you kidding me? That was kind of how it was received. Like, the geeks at the time were not the least, the worst dancers at any wedding you've ever been to. That's, the people who come to these tech conferences are the last people you want to see dancing. So it was kind of a really foreign concept to launch a dancing app. And he said, no, mark my words. Dancing's going to be big on the internet. Like, this is going to be a big thing. And the geeks just weren't, it was too early. And, but he was right. I mean, boy, was he right. He was just too early. And, but I have to say how lovely of people both of them are to, deal with on a kind of personal level, like rehearsing for an event like this and all that.
Tyler?
Yeah.
Who's doing your book, dude?
No, I don't. I'm not doing a book.
You got it. You know so many.
I will tell you this.
Many amazing humans. You know so many amazing humans at a different level.
I will tell you this.
That's unique.
Once Ashton started getting rolling into tech, Jared Leto, I could tell, was clearly wanted to follow, and Jared's whip smart, like really one of the most intelligent people I've gotten to know. And many of you remember my story of getting arrested with Jared in Las Vegas, but and then Jared got into investing in startups and has also done incredibly well with that. Like he makes, both Ashton and Jared make way more from their tech investments than anything they ever did in Hollywood. So
apropos of nothing in particular, did you guys see the criminal probe announced into Tether?
That was the next headline. Well done. So,
and then just as a side note, does anyone else notice that Vitalik seemed to have trouble coming to the United States in 2013 to go work for Ripple? Not sure what those things are related to, but it might be worth looking and poking around on those topics.
So the headline is, this is the next big story. Tether executives said to face criminal probe into bank fraud. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. The Department of Justice examining whether banks were misled about crypto business. Tether says it's committed to cooperating with law enforcement. And the U.S. probe in Tether is homing in whether executives behind the digital token committed bank fraud. A potential criminal case would have broad implications for the cryptocurrency market. So we're going to have to wait and see what happens
watch
there.
This space and mark down that I said to watch this space.
Yeah, you're not the only one saying that about Tether. And in fact, my buddy Jason Calacanis is kind of one of the people leading.
I might have sent him an email about this a while back.
Yeah, I will check in with him on that because he certainly got fired up about it about a month ago, and really wanting to know everything about Tether, and he's really doing a lot of deep diving, and somebody's giving him, whispering in his ear for sure. But his recent podcasts, he did a deep dive analysis of where Tether appeared on CNBC about two or 3 days ago, and it was a really interesting interview done over Skype or Zoom or whatever, and it was their lawyer and their CTO, not the CEO or the CMO, and it was very not the behavior you would expect of actors who are on the up and up. It certainly didn't extinguish any concerns. In fact, it inflamed the concerns that something doesn't smell right. And so that's why this headline now that the DOJ is probing Tether is not actually a surprise. If you watch that CNBC interview and you were concerned that something was amiss, you're probably doubling down on those assumptions, and the DOJ was probably already wondering if something was amiss. And so this is going to be really interesting to see how that shakes out.
Tyler?
Yeah.
There's a few related random pieces that connect this interweb, as I think that was Charles's voice, recognizing his voice. BlockFi now also has another state that's basically taking it down for having interest-bearing products, which obviously they're getting investigated now, BlockFi in certain states. And I believe Alexander was running a room where they got very heated over this sort of BlockFi and sort of just the narrative around which are the BlockFi states that they're coming down on. And I think part of what I agree with Charles and yourself. I think this is a very interesting space to watch because it's all interconnected. Because the related article that I sent that kind of led me to this was the fact that just look at the Goldman Sachs tweet I just did about maybe less than 30 minutes ago about that now Goldman Sachs is getting heavily involved with DeFi and ETFs around DeFi with Ethereum. So like I mentioned, the one piece, and I know Ken's in the audience as well, but the one piece that there's still a lot of lucrative and juicy questions about, which are very fair from those that are working in the finance space, is how can Ethereum help the derivatives products as it goes forward into the future, right? I was in FinTech and Payments over the weekend with Cal. I don't know if Cal was there, but I spoke about an article that was from a few days ago, probably now a week, about the SWIFT system. And now the SWIFT system in Europe is kind of old and it needs to be upgraded, but now there's like the powers that be are trying to figure out how it will get updated. So I think this is all an interoperable web, and I agree with Charles and yourself. It's going to be very interesting to watch this space for the next 2 months, because I think there's going to be a lot of moves and shakes, a lot of chess games going, a lot of trumping, a lot of fudding. I just believe there's going to be a good old roller coaster time during this period.
I would say that those of you who are bullish on crypto are going to discover that the long arm of the federal government of the United States is not your friend. And I'll just leave it at that.
Tyler, that's what you said about the bear. We talked about the bear hug.
Yeah. I've been taking that position for a long time. I don't think the government's going to let that happen. I think they're going to perceive it similar to, rightly or wrongly, they're going to take the position that it's not in their interests. And
they're going to see they see it as an attack on the U.S. dollar.
Right. I think that's...
And if you believe in the U.S. Constitution, the U.S. Constitution states rather emphatically that the U.S. government is the sole coiner of money. Now, whether that's true or not, and whether that, screwing with the dollar as the world's reserve currency is sort of something that a lot of people, not just Americans, want to see not happen for the stability of the global order. So I think they'll take it very personally. And that I might know more about this than I'm letting on. Just something to think about.
By the way, there is a story,
Tyler,
I don't know if you guys reported on it yet, but it just broke in the last 24 hours that Tether executives are under federal criminal investigation. So again, the arm of the government, if you will.
Yeah, we saw that headline. I have a quick I don't necessarily need this to be a massive discussion. I'm just quickly from yesterday's perspective that basically Bitcoin's out of China, effectively. I mean, they're driving through their digital currency. What we've just heard from Charles and the discussion here, and then trying to reconcile that with the kind of very recent few days bullishness on Bitcoin and a little bit of crypto. I can't reconcile the two at the moment. Maybe there's a short-term issue, but I think yeah, caution there because I can't reconcile those insights with the bullishness right now.
If
They're
I could just
pumping
give
over
a
fake
couple of,
news, Carl. I sent you the link already. They
Yeah, I
speculate
couldn't read
about
the link.
Amazon and then they pump it up and then now it's fake news.
I
Right,
Fake.
think that
right.
Lots
there's
of speculation in this field.
I think
Oh,
there's
sorry,
two
wait,
things.
that Amazon thing is fake news because I couldn't click your link. It didn't open, Cheryl. So that
It's old
Amazon,
news.
it's old news, yeah, but it's not, yeah, okay.
The
So,
Amazon news came from February, and I think you have to look at the Tether news as old news as well, which is what Bitcoiners want you to think, that it's pure FUD. But the truth of the
Yes.
matter is that they
so they
already were
pumped it up the
censured.
last 3 or 4 days, like
Well,
effectively.
They're just
definitely
desperate to pump it up.
there's definitely an incentive for people to push that news about Amazon. It was old news, but the Tether news is also old news. But I think that the bigger point, which Tyler and Amy referred to, is that this is the bear hug of the regulator. And I don't know who was also saying that the regulator has also been very active in closing down Binance and their unregulated activities. Uniswap Labs also closed down their access to synthetics and some other tokens. And the FATF also, which is the regulatory guidance that governs all major countries and their approach to the Financial Action Task Force, especially in respect of money laundering and anti-terrorist financing. And they issued guidelines that make it very clear that the governments of the world are going to bring close those that are going to comply with their regulations and make it extremely difficult for those people that don't. The only exception to this rule is technologies that are truly software and that are truly decentralized and distributed and that are peer-to-peer. Those will be the only technologies. That is the line in the sand. Something that is genuinely owned of by and for the people, that will stand on the constitutional rights of the individual versus those that will be going via the regulated route, as I think Dan or Charles may have noted.
That's an interesting point.
I will just say, so I've since moved to Northern Virginia from Texas for reasons that are best not discussed on an app owned by Chinese people, Clubhouse. But every person I meet who deals with finance and the Treasury, who deals with SEC, every single one of them is a hater of crypto. And not like a sort of kind of hater, like a real hater. Just something to think about, just from a personal observation.
So that makes it difficult to parse out the love-hate around the centralized versus the decentralized aspects, because the truly it'll be interesting to see on the decentralized side if they're able to shut it down. And there can be debate about that, and it depends on the architecture.
If it's truly decentralized, it can't be shut down. That's right. The beauty. It's unstoppable.
Right, but I mean, the issue is that since basically you've had banks, I mean, banks have more or less always been a creature of the state, right? And so eventually you have to take your token and convert it into something you can eat, unless you find somebody willing to barter with you, and then that's sort of a different kind of thing. But
you can eat USDC.
Yeah, in theory you could do it, but I would just say that for those of you who are dependent at all on the U.S. or sort of Western financial system, I would steer clear of crypto and have advised friends and family to do alike. And I say this as somebody who was a very early Bitcoiner. I love the dream, but the federal government is not filled with dreamers.
And there's clearly some dreamers with the price going up yesterday from about 30,000 to 40,000, and there's two different headlines trying to explain that. One says that Bitcoin soars to nearly 40,000, epic short squeeze amid report Amazon to accept Bitcoin. So that's the first related headline, and then the other is expert analysis that Bitcoin's price rally could be linked to potential U.S. Bitcoin ETF approval. So there's just a couple.
I want to be firmly on record. Again, talking with people in D.C. from Amazon, there's absolutely no way in God's green earth that they will ever take Bitcoin at Amazon. And as to the ETF, I believe that there's been subsequent news that there were delays on whether or not that ETF would actually be would be allowed. So again, I would just want to be firmly cautionary to people. I'm trying to tell you something. Please pay attention, those of you who are investors, because I don't want. Now, hypothetically speaking, let's say you are a denizen of a foreign country that did not necessarily want the U.S. dollar to be the world's reserve currency. What would you do? You would plant fake stories. You would strongly encourage people to go and buy these tokens to basically show that there's still some support because you want to get around the US banking system and the SWIFT system. And that, let's say hypothetically, you are a young Russian born Canadian, hypothetically speaking, who likes to hang out with movie stars and invented another alternative currency, but you had all sorts of troubles getting into the U.S. back in the day for security reasons, again, hypothetically speaking, and that you had another currency that was, being propped up. And I think we're going to see that there's all kinds of wild moves in the currencies, cryptocurrencies moving forward, and that a lot of those wild moves are not necessarily just retail investors pumping them up.
But Charles, if you are referring to China and other players in the market, then it goes from that premise. What you're trying to say is it goes against what they want to do, because they own about $2 trillion. I mean, it's like stacked around like pretty much in the
Quorum, very
basements.
specifically what I heard, just so that we don't go into a rabbit hole. Yeah, and Charles doesn't have to say it. I can say it because I'm just like independent, and I don't. But he was making the connection to the earlier Tether
He's talking about Ethereum
discussion and headlines. Yeah,
initially.
but
Ethereum. I'm talking
yeah,
about Ethereum and Tether, and I would just
yeah.
say, in the case of China, the Chinese state wants to keep wants to keep um, you know, keep its own position with the U.S. financial system. So you'll see, the Chinese are effectively banning Bitcoin exchanges, banning Bitcoin generally, and yet, whether or not that they do that on the state level as a weapon against the U.S. dollar, which is something Peter Thiel talked about so many months ago. I think that's something to sort of think through very clearly.
Charles, could I pose a hypothetical situation to you? Because it's been irking me a bit. You know how you have all these banned miners that have left China? Sort of a hypothetical. What if it's actually strategically China's strategy all along is to get the miners out of China and into the United States?
Well, it is
Because then
interesting
it
that,
brings them into the U.S. and now the miners are in the U.S. and those would not be so easily let go out of China. Those companies would not be so easily let go out of the China.
of course, well, the question to ask yourself on the question of Bitcoin miners is who manufactures the chips on which those Bitcoin miners operate. That might be something else to think through, and who's selling those machines on the new or on the discounted market. So I would just say again, just somebody who's been around the block on Bitcoin and the highs and lows, and who has bought my share of things with Bitcoin. In fact, I think I went to a Korean restaurant, the first Korean restaurant in LA to take Bitcoin many years back. So I go way back with Bitcoin. Again, I share the dream, share the hope, but I know that the federal government of the United States is not filled with hopers and dreamers, and I know that this is something that it's very unfortunate that this is happening, because I think there are ways in which cryptocurrencies generally could be used by the U.S. government to achieve a lot of objectives. But I don't think that you're going to see a very receptive Biden administration when it comes to cryptocurrencies. And the Tether news, the delays on the ETF, the sort of fake news that you're seeing pumping up the price, or sort of speculative news, I think all of that is of a piece.
Okay.
Can I ask you, Charles, that I think just a couple of weeks or a week ago that we were discussing even Visa getting into developing an ecosystem that's based on cryptocurrency transactions, and then they were reporting even having a billion worth of cryptocurrency related transactions already. So why do you think a company like Visa that has I mean, worldwide acceptance would get into that if you think that's what's happening.
There's less to that than it appears. They're simply making it possible for the exchange to offload into Visa for a purchase at a merchant with a Visa card. Visa never touches the crypto at all.
Yes, they're just charging transaction fee, which is their business, Aaron, right?
Yeah, many people mistake people charging fees on the movement of these assets as indicative of them being supportive necessarily of the underlying asset. And I think there are a lot of fee monkeys sort of on the internet. Something to sort of think through.
Yeah,
Ignorant.
one of the ways that I assess the headlines that's just generally messy. There are decisions and that companies make that are just options. They're reversible, right? They're just options. For Visa, it's like, yeah, if it takes off, fine, we get transaction fees. If it doesn't, so as an executive team, they're just sitting there going, right, let's put some options out there. Where it so it's kind of differentiating from where people are taking options in uncertain moments, and people who are actually betting on things. And I think that Visa one, I reconcile it as everyone's saying here, and Cheryl's just said it, and others, is that it's kind of like an option, like if it fine, and you don't have to think about it massively.
You
And
could
Tyler
call it a
just said,
survival
yeah,
option, Carl.
yeah.
You could call it a survival option because they are in the crosshairs. And I think it's more than just an option, quite frankly. They've got big exposure to USDC, which is a regulated stablecoin, and with their relationship with Circle and Goldman Sachs, etc. And they've also applied for a slew of patents in the crypto space. So I don't think it's um, an
So
option
on the
on its own.
basis of this
It's to
decision,
protect
Visa
them.
is so if I then extend that, and it's not just an option to ignore, it's just then on the basis of this, then Visa, and if hypothetically we hypothetically we buy into the thesis here, I totally then Visa's overpriced in the marketplace. I mean, it's
Well,
going to be
remember,
in trouble. It's
Visa's current,
effectively,
what, 500,
Absolutely, Visa.
530 billion Visa, something like that. And so, they have to look for means of boosting growth of their own stock price. And so what you'll see with a lot of these banks and sort of large financial institutions is sort of signaling because they don't want to get out indicated by competitors, right? They don't want to be in a situation in which, some other competitor takes off. And so I would just be broadly skeptical of anything until real capital is deployed, to actually boost these sorts of things. That's just, something to sort of think through.
So two related headlines here. One from Faraz from Bloomberg that says, early crypto mogul says China crackdown could lead to outright ban. China's crackdown on cryptocurrencies will probably intensify and may even lead to an outright ban on holdings the tokens, according to Bobby Lee, one of the initial big crypto whales. And then a also related headline from Heyman from The Guardian in the UK says that cryptocurrencies could lead to limitless losses for governments. Governments could face limitless losses as a result of businesses that accept payments in untaxed and untraceable cryptocurrencies going bust, and insolvency expert has warned. So I just shared both of those to the Tech News Twitter account at TNATW. And there's, a whole bunch of other headlines to get into. On the topic of China, we talked about yesterday. There's an article that I'm just retweeting now that you can also read about the data-driven iteration that helped China's Genki Forest become a $6 billion beverage giant in just 5 years, taking on Pepsi and Coke. And it was basically a geek, a startup guy who did a couple startups that didn't work out, but he understands how data works, and he used that data to make a product to compete with companies who aren't really good at using data, which is the beverage industry. So he has made a $6 billion beverage industry because geeks are gonna beat non-geeks with their data every time. So it'll be interesting to see what areas geeks get into. And on that topic of China, there's a headline now from South China Morning Post, which is from China, that says It's about China jobs. Inside the world's biggest workforce, China has a workforce of close to 900 million people, of which 350 million are migrant workers and some 9 million are new graduates this year. China's workforce, though, is expected to decline due to an aging population, with Beijing set to raise the retirement age. See, we were trying to figure out, that's an interesting development. And indeed, they will do that, almost guaranteed. Because the whole crackdown on ed tech appears to have ties to the declining birth rate in China. And this is from an article a month ago that says when the Chinese birth rate data finally came out, it was not released for 2 years in a row. And then it did come out this year, and it was much lower than expected. And it's of great concern and should be of great concern to every country, honestly. But China's taking it particularly seriously because of the size of their population. And I often refer to the metaphor of pyramids, where a traditional population is shaped like a pyramid with more young people than old people, and the young people are at the bottom. And then when you have less young people at the bottom, you have an inverted pyramid, and that's very unstable. And then the size of the population is the size of the pyramid. So when you have an inverted pyramid that's very large, it becomes a really, really unstable, as is the case in China. So they're very aware of the problem. They're giving it the attention that it clearly deserves. And apparently that's why they're cracking down on ed tech companies who are making profits off of the education system, and that's a burden or a friction to having children, is the cost of educating them. So they want to remove that, and so they're even now giving some kind of tax benefits. They're allowing you to have as many children as you want. They're now going to increase the retirement age, and they're going to continue to do things until the problem is fixed, because it will kill them if they don't. The country will collapse if they don't fix that. So you're going to continue.
Well, China is by no means unique in that.
No,
right?
I've said precisely that. In fact,
yes.
there's very few countries that aren't inverted demographies in the developing world. Africa has a traditional demography pyramid. Mexico has a traditional demography. America is uniquely in between. It looks more like a cylinder than a inverted or right up pyramid. Japan has the most inverted of pyramids, and that's been well known for a very long time. However, there is, it's just this overall scale of the size of China that makes it of particular concern. That's a very large inverted pyramid. So it's, I honestly think kudos to China for giving it the attention it deserves. I think more countries need to do so, because it's going to become end up hurting some countries. You're going to see some countries collapsing as a result of it, and I know China doesn't want that to happen. And that's why you're seeing these drastic moves being made around, cutting out the ed tech companies so that everyone pays the same amount, and they have essentially, the state is announced as a result of this ed tech crackdown that they want to basically remove that financial burden to having children, and that's why they're willing to kill the sacrificial lamb of the billions of dollars of ed tech unicorns for that purpose.
Well, in the U.S., we're seeing a similar sort of thing, right? We're seeing with the child tax credit that's gone out, sort of encouraging people to have children. And then, of course, we're also seeing a crackdown on a lot of the student loan industry, which is, of course, one of the larger causes of why people don't have affordable family formation, right? They end up getting so firmly indebted financially that it's hard to start companies, hard to buy a house. Student loan bubble in the U.S. is quite a problem from a demographic perspective.
Well, that's how the U.S. is dealing with it. Like in Sweden, for example, Aslak can tell you, it's like, they give parents, a year and a half off, of paid maternity and paternity leave, and Finland notoriously pays you to have children. When you have the child at the hospital, which is completely free, you get a box full of everything you need and $1,000 cash, and all kind. And there's no cost for anything in the early years of having a child at all. All the schooling and everything. Well, the schooling's all free anyways up through university, but even at the pre school level, where children care level, when the parents go back to work, even that's covered and everything. So it's like there's no financial burden at all in notably Finland, but Scandinavia has similar programs as well. But the U.S. still has a long way to go in incentivizing people to have kids, because we're such an immigration rich country. We could solve our problem at any time by we have half the world would happily move to America in a heartbeat. So we don't have to do it on the rate of childbirth rates. We could fix our problem on immigration alone. So
Tyler, by
yeah.
the way, Wall Street Journal actually did the piece I just tweeted, and I think Elon also did that. So for him, for this to come from him also, is 0.53% growth in last year in the US, which is the lowest forever. So yeah, this is a present danger.
So
Yeah.
I should say that I'm not as convinced that a declining birth rate, population growth, is necessarily a bad thing, because in Japan they've had a declining, population, but they've also had rising living standards. So I suppose it depends on sort of how you see, the trade-offs here. It's not as clear as more people, net good. If that were the case, then we would essentially have sort of unrestricted immigration, and there's obviously costs on things like housing stock, on things like the educational services of a country, to have unrestricted immigration, to say nothing of the environment.
Yeah, Japan.
Yeah, but I don't think this is a
I agree.
short-term approach, right? Like, it's more about the long-term strategy for the benefit of all humans, and this is how they're
Right, but
approaching it.
you could make a, if you're running a nation state, obviously you want high skilled immigration, which is why you're seeing both the UK and the United States. You're seeing efforts in both countries to have increased ease of immigration when it comes to high skilled immigration, but lower skilled immigration, is not necessarily a net positive. To say nothing of the effects on, again, on housing stock, on environmental policies. I believe the Sierra Club at one point, and a number of other sort of environmental organizations in the U.S., were actually immigration restrictionist for quite a while, until there was sort of a change brought about by a donor several years back. So, for people who are in poor countries, my condolences to them, and I wish them well. But there's a question of sort of lifeboat ethics with some of these countries, where it comes to the U.S. If we essentially have unrestricted immigration, this is not 1950 or 1900, and if you're dealing in a world in which robots are going to automate away a lot of jobs, it perhaps doesn't make sense to import a number of people. I mean, there's a critique that Peter Thiel has given in the past, and not to fanboy on him, but others have made this point as well, which is that immigration is always everywhere an anti-technology measure, because what ends up happening with lots of immigration is that you have a de facto real wage that's low, and so what that ends up doing is it decreases the incentive that entrepreneurs have to actually automate away bad jobs. And so I think that's something to sort of think about as we sort of pursue immigration in a more serious way. Obviously, you want to bring in all the Sergey Brins you can in a country, or Elon Musk's, for that matter. But you maybe want to be careful and more selective about the immigration policies you pursue.
Yeah.
However, just to counter real quick, or small, like there, I mean, how do you know which one is a Sergey and Elon? When you think about it, when they came to the country, they weren't, they were
Well,
kids.
in the case of Sergey, I believe his family were PhDs. They were they had quite accomplished themselves. They were refusenic Jews, which is a population that tends to be quite successful. In the case of Elon, I believe his grandfather was American, and his mother's family had established itself well in Canada, as well as his father's. So I do tend to agree with you that you don't necessarily know ahead of time, but I would contend that it's not as much of a secret. I mean, certain types of high achieving traits do run in families, after all.
I think there is also the reverse of that. Really, Africa, for example, there has been a ton of problem, especially with the brain drain. That a lot of people who are educated and well-to-do have been immigrating all over the U.S. and Canada, all developed countries, and now, in fact, African countries actually are doing the concerted effort to get them back. including myself, I'm back in Ethiopia. But Ghana has been really successful getting into all those facilities that the diaspora who are well to do needed and have a reason not to come back. So that's what they have been doing, the year of return that has been really promoted in Ghana and most African countries. So I think there is a different approach from different countries, from developed to undeveloped countries. Of course, Africa is blessed having a young population, but at the same time, it's a challenge because we don't have enough job opportunities for millions and millions of Africans that are joining the workforce. So I think it's a balancing act because we can't developed countries can't just keep on taking the well-educated and the brain drain to continue. There's got to be a balance to me.
Can I ask a question,
By the
guys?
way, just quickly on this particular point, it's not just about the actual education and educated people who are going to be actually driving the economy and like in terms of the innovation and everything and the education, and also from the perspective that it's not just about that you're going to be actually leading in terms of whatever the demographics of the actual society would be. We have to pay attention to this. How many people in one economy are in the middle class and they have the spending power in order to make sure that the internal economy works? So that's another angle that we have to look at it. Like, so half the Chinese population, if they are in the middle class, then obviously their internal economy can actually work very well. But if in the US, like quarter of the population are below 18, and then about 16 to 17% are over 65,
Mm-hmm.
is the middle class is in there somewhere. And that's another angle. That's why we are looking into actually finding a market in India where growing a middle class population is going to be probably the market for other European and US
I should say,
suppliers.
I should say, just in the spirit of full disclosure, that I tend to favor a very, very low immigration policy in the U.S. for precisely the reason Mesret, brought up, which is I do think there's something quite immoral about, essentially taking the smartest people from around the world and leaving, taking those people and pressing them into the service of the U.S. And I think there is some sense in which the U.S., is a beneficiary of that. But at the extent, I mean, the number of failed states in the world is only growing. And if you create a situation in which people can flee whatever country they're in, there creates a sort of a sort of problem that essentially that those institutions won't necessarily be built up because they could always run to the United States or Canada or some sort of other place. And I think in terms of the environmental impacts, we can't really, I mean, if we're serious about climate change, we cannot really allow lots of people in the world to have the same consumption patterns as the US and Europe. And I know that that's a difficult question, thing for a lot of people to hear. With the sort of only solution to a lot of these problems is technological innovation. And I don't see any around that anytime soon.
Okay, so
I agree, and moving away from immigration back to just the population growth that Tyler was talking about. I mean, that assumes some kind that growth is good. Well, everyone, of course, assumes growth is good, but it's not possible actually to keep doing that. We're already using 1.5 Earths worth of renewable resources, and that's not even factoring in like climate change. And if everybody did, I mean, if everyone like the United States, it would require 3 Earths. And last I checked, I should maybe have to double check, but last I checked, we only have one. And this ties into the limits of growth that was recently updated with 50 years of data showing that on the path we're on of trying to keep growing and growing and growing, like algae eating in a petri dish to the edge, we're going to hit the wall around 2040. And so, anyway,
then you're
this whole concept that
you're
we just need to
very
keep growing is just
foolishly
not going to work.
assuming the Earth has a fixed output. It can be optimized, and as it has been.
No, I'm talking about the renewable resources of the Earth.
We're able to,
Yeah,
we're
there was
spending
this whole
the principle right now is what we're doing.
yes.
There was this whole Julian Simon, Paul Ehrlich debate about this, though, right? About we don't really know the full carrying capacity of the Earth. We've had all sorts of debates about this over time, And there's this is an issue that is like politically very fraught, and it's there. I tend to share your view, Dan. In terms of thinking seriously about renewables and these other questions, but I do wonder how much we're being overly pessimistic. I mean, we've seen throughout history that humans are extremely adaptable, even to terrible situations, and so I think we should maybe kind of keep that in mind.
The updated data for the limits of growth was done in the 70s, right? So the 50 years of data shows that no, we're not going to run out of resources, which was the original I guess, calculations, but we're going to hit the limits of pollution, and the climate change is the proxy for pollution in the updated data. And certainly looks like we're on track for that. I mean, that's why Tyler's living on the island. So, it's not like some possible future thing. We're experiencing it today, and we know it's only going to get
Dan?
much, much worse and going to reduce carrying capacity.
We could just take the problem industries to Mars, right? Isn't that the new thing?
Yes,
Or
of
into
course.
space, right? That was
That's what I meant. Yeah, right.
We
Amber's
can
idea
run
was
away
to
from
go
the
into
world,
space.
make damage here and then move elsewhere. That's a possibility. But Dan, a quick question. Actually, Tyler, I shared something through a Clubhouse network here on Twitter earlier, where basically the Harvard School of Law is discussing the recent judgment on the Shell, it's overall in the Netherlands, and what that might actually be to directors of companies overall, as basically Shell is being forced to measure the negative impact on climate change now going forward, and there's implications for the leadership in that in a personal way, as it is always in Europe. When you run a company and you're appointed director, you have probably a higher liability than in the US. And it's just an interesting thought and being discussed by the experts here, what that actually might mean. So I wanted to hear a little bit also, Dan, if you have an opinion here, because I think that's probably a right move in the right direction, but we're not only measuring now, for example, we had that recently for asset managers in Europe right now under new regulations since March this year. We have to clearly state if we claim we do ESG investments, we have to measure and prove that, which is fine. But all the others, which basically do investments which might harm the planet or the people, that is not measured. So I think that judgment in the Netherlands is actually in the right way, where we start to measure overall what the negative footprint, CO2 footprint of certain actions or investments really mean, and what that means to the leadership of these companies. Dan, are you familiar with that topic?
Well, in general, yeah. I mean, I think that's some of the most optimistic stuff that's happening is that the financial community is starting. I mean, it's just starting to consider the negative impacts of their investments and the whole divestment movement, which has done really well over the last 5 years. And now there's more focus of not just divestment, but we'll stop investing in the bad things, but let's start investing in good things. And that's kind of ESG investing. And a lot of it's greenwashing, of course, and some cleaning up of that might occur. So I think that's good, really good. It's certainly not enough, but it's certainly at least a step in the right direction.
Because again, the governance might change overall, if this really gets throughout on a global scale, and maybe because of the new administration in the US, that's actually something they might hopefully consider. And I think that will trigger leadership in a greater way. I mean, we have that the same on our itself, as impact investors, as we, always constantly measure the impact on the ground, and that also includes the CO2 offset, overall on our investment activities. But I think that if we are going here now in a direction where we actually start to measure, the pollution of our actions and investments overall, that's really a great move in the right direction.
But one thing to consider, though, that we use the word pollution, and when we think of pollution, we think of air and water pollution, which gets better when you stop doing it. But CO2 doesn't do that. It stays in the atmosphere for hundreds of thousands of years. So it's actually a different kind of pollution that we're not really used to dealing with. It's kind of a one-way kind of thing. I mean, there's technologies, and I'm working on it, that could remove it out of the atmosphere, but that's a massive effort that hasn't started at all and would be very expensive. So basically, we're stuck with whatever CO2 we put up there. So
Dan, have you
we
looked at
better get used to the
modifying?
weather.
Dan, have you looked at modifying the genetics of plants? I mean, I spoke with Charles DeLisi, who's the father of the Human Genome Project, and he's got a few Nobel Prize winners, working on a sort of making it so that we slightly genetically modify plants so as to eat more of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Has that been something you've pursued at all?
I haven't pursued. I've read a little bit about that. There's a lot of interesting quote natural solutions to increase CO2 removal, but that's not one I put a lot of faith in. The problem is already with the forest. Just a study just the other day I read where they looked at trees in, I think it was Colorado, that were not damaged by bark beetle or wildfire. Okay, so this one's not touched by those two things, and yet the mortality rate went up by like a factor of 3 already because of the heat stress and drought. So, yeah, we can do a few things like that, but the trends are in the wrong direction, right? So, and then the big thing to worry about is the Amazon this century. It's not supposed to be in drought. It's a rainforest, and it's been like sixth or seventh drought already, and it's really taking its toll. Plus, of course, we're cutting it down as well. So that kind of stuff. All those trends are in the wrong direction, and the limits of growth. Forget the resource problem. Just look what we're doing. I mean, we all know it. We've talked about it here a lot. We're seeing it happen, play out, and it's only going in one direction so far. And emissions are still going up. We're not really addressing the problem yet. So we've got to get serious about it. Thanks.
Tyler, just quickly, I sense you've been wanting to move on for a little while, but would people be interested in a deep dive on the population conversation, like maybe in one of Dan's green tech rooms, and get Charles in there, because I've got a ton of questions about that. But this isn't necessarily the space for such a deep dive. On the environmental stuff.
Give your biggest question on population.
Well, my biggest one was a generic of like how much of this is based on growth, of keeping exponential growth, and how much of this is actually real world consequences. That is, is there a point where people die? Is there a point where people can no longer afford to eat? Or is this all keeping yourself in the league tables of the international countries on growth and sort of market value is like along that lines, really, because we talk about this a hell of a lot. But it always seems to be from a perspective of, well, anything but exponential growth is bad. That means your country, your state is going downhill, it's dying. But the conversation, I mean, we touched on it a little bit there, but it's never so much on the real human aspect of it. What happens to a person at each class level when a certain portion of a certain class starts to decline? If the middle class goes, what happens to white-collar workers? If white-collar workers are no longer as prevalent, what happens to the middle class? So that kind of conversation, maybe. I don't know if other people would be interested in that.
So Carl, that was just to, yeah, if I can understand your question, are we being driven by the need for exponential growth and to be higher on that growth league table and driven to increase our population, something like that, right? And if it's that, something like that, yeah, if it's that, that was the rationale for Nigel Farage's whole campaign for the Brexit campaign, effectively, for the UK, and that's the kind of way to look at his general thing, his general premise, and the UK voted for that. So the UK's, in your perspective, if that was the case, the UK's voted rightly for that, right? And I don't want to get into Brexit
exactly,
thing, but I'm just saying that's what you effectively are saying. Right?
Yeah, indeed. And if the major risk is to blue collar workers, then the solution is different. Is more automation or robotics. If the problem is white collar workers proportionately, well, that's different. Then how do you replace middle management? What you're talking about, AI and that kind of thing. How do you optimize that? But I feel like this is a really deep conversation and might change dependent on the country and the culture in each country. But I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one interested in deep dive on this. But
no, it's a good one.
Population is the taboo subject of climate change, by the way.
I'm all in favor of the population decreasing. The technology is going to continue to innovate, and those innovations are going to continue to expand the number of people that can live on one planet, as it has done for centuries, and very rapidly at that, just not rapidly enough. So, but although in recent years, the rate of innovation and the rate of population are starting to equal out. It's just happening too late, given the amount of carbon in the air. So, but my point is that it matters to me not at all if the population decreases. It matters very much to countries for their economies and for their bankers if their economies decrease. And for the planet, from a CO2 output perspective, yeah, you could argue it's a good thing that the population decreases. The point is that from the government's economic perspective, that's where it's a bad thing, of which I not care at all personally, because I'm not connected to any government grid. So here's on this point. Here's a Bloomberg article just from a couple days ago titled "How to Start a Baby Boom." It's called "The Next China: How to Start a Baby Boom." The number of babies born in China last year was the smallest in 6 decades. It looks like there will be even fewer this year. The forecast based on statistics, and by the way, that 6 decades ago was during a famine in China called the Great Famine in 1960. And this year was about equal to 1960, the Great Famine, where it was tremendously lower than the year before or after the Great Famine. And to give you an idea of how low the birth rate is currently in China, and that's why you're going to start to see Xi Jinping and the CCP make all kinds of really interesting moves to adjust for that, because economically they need to if they want to survive as a country economically. So they're
Well, there are lots of things one could do, right? One could ban birth control, ban certain people from entering the labor force.
Yep.
I mean, there are lots of policy levers here to pursue, but each country will find it in its own way. I have, if you don't mind, I have an NSO related headline.
Go ahead.
So, as you'll recall, a few days prior, I mentioned that the French were extremely upset about NSO hacking their presidents.
Right.
And here's a story from the Times of Israel, which is that Gantz, who's involved with their defense, Israeli defense, is heading to Paris to discuss NSO group with a French counterpart. And there was another headline that mentions just how pissed off the French are about the whole NSO matter. And you also saw a number of U.S. congressmen and congresswomen mention the NSO scandal and do a letter, which is kind of interesting that it took so long. But there's now a letter that 4 members of Congress put out, and it's quite interesting. It's Tom Malinowski, Katie Porter, Joaquin Castro, and Anna Ishu. I'm not sure if I'm saying her last name correctly, but it's the headline is "Enough is Enough," and essentially what they argue in this letter is that private companies should not be selling sophisticated cyber intrusion tools on the open market, and the United States should work with its allies to regulate its trade. Companies that sell such incredible tools to dictatorships are the AQ cons of the cyber world. So it's a explicit link to AQ Khan, the Pakistani scientist who was proliferating nuclear weapons. And the other sort of continuing on here, selling cyber intrusion technology to governments like Saudi Arabia, Kazakhstan, and Rwanda based on the assurances of responsible use is like selling guns to the mafia and believing they will only be used for target practice. So quite interesting. First sort of serious mention beyond Senator Ron Wyden, all Democrats who are connected with the sort of U.S. Intelligence services in some sense, and all sort of in keeping with this Western view that Israel needs to sort of clean up its act when it comes to cyber technology and the like.
It sounds like it's a bigger umbrella than just an Israel issue. It's like just being mindful of certain technologies coming from certain states that can have negative use cases.
Yes, I was told today that among the DOJ, the cyber intrusion hacking issue has become the most important issue that they're facing in terms of looking for cases to bring. So I think we're just beginning on this sort of thing.
If the world stage can't regulate guns and narcotics efficiently, I'd love to see a plan where they somehow regulate an industry where you only need a laptop and an internet connection.
Well, in the case, I mean, it's a great question, Carl, but in the U.S. case, I mean, you saw Novelpina, which is the fund that owned NSO, got a lot of its money from UK pensioners and Oregonian pensioners. So one thing you could do very quickly, if you were so inclined, is to bar pension funds and others, endowments, that sort of thing, from investing in these sorts of technology companies. But I think you're quite right. Like, how do you ultimately regulate this sort of thing? I mean, I suppose one way to do it is, is to basically try to control the development much more. Try to identify people who are involved in it. I mentioned before the Nicole Perlroth book. They tell me this is how the world will end. Who's the New York Times reporter who interviewed some of my friends at Vulnerable Research Lab and elsewhere. And I think it's well worth sort of reading that book for those who are interested in this topic. But I think we're beginning to see that, at least when it comes to the French and and to the United States to a lesser extent, but there's sort of a growing recognition that a lot of these companies, particularly ones in Israel and in Russia and China, that they really need to be brought to heel so that the global order can sort of survive.
So
how do you keep pension funds from investing in certain companies? That's like never been done. I mean, in fact, a lot of the big pension money is state pension fund money, which, by the way, which gets into a whole other issue of state sovereignty versus the federal government. The government can't tell pension funds that they can't invest in certain types of companies. They don't even tell them not to invest in tobacco companies. Sometimes state pension funds on their own decide they're not going to invest in tobacco companies, but the federal government doesn't tell them that.
Oh, the federal government does that all the time. I mean, CFIUS is a good example of the use of the Department of Treasury saying that you can't invest, you can't be associated, you have to divest uh, from certain companies. I mean, there are sanctions that are in place with the number of development of certain technologies. I mean, the government does that all the time. They also give directions, which pension which basically pension funds can be directed in only certain uses. So of course, there's a way in which the federal government can do that. They
Those are
do it all the
restrictions
time.
usually on the companies. They're not restrictions. If something trades on the New York Stock Exchange, pension funds can buy it, period.
Right. So in the case of Novelpina, as an example, right. So this is for those who are not familiar, this is a sort of nominally British, Russian aligned sort of venture fund, that sort of private equity fund, really, that was raising money from UK pension funds and from Oregon pension funds. And what ended up happening is that there's a sort of scandal around this because they invested in NSO Group. There's questions in Oregon about whether or not they should have been allowed to actually invest with this fund. So you'll start to see more tighter, financial controls in the U.S. on these types of technologies. Obviously, if you're a pension fund, there's certain things you can't invest in because your members say you can't do it. And I think we'll see more of that on the activist side. I think you'll also see more of that on the government direction side as well.
Okay, let's go into some headlines here. I got a whole bunch burning a hole in my pocket. Swedish fintech giant Klarna, which, as many of you know, I am completely biased in favor of, as they're one of my longest supporters, acquires German startup called Stocard for about $110 million. The Swedish fintech giant Klarna seems to be on an acquisition sprint after acquiring UK-based Hero earlier this month, which is a social commerce app. And that raises the question, what is Stocard? Founded in 2011, Stocard offers 60 million users worldwide a bundling of customer cards in an app, which also provides attractive discounts. And integrated mobile payment feature is also part of Stocard offering. Last year, Stocard launched its mobile wallet. So that could give you a hint as to what Klarna has in mind coming up. And thank you for that one, Poppy. The next, I have 20 really interesting ones that I cherry picked out here. And one is that from Gulf News out of the Middle East. It says, launching a food business in Dubai, a cloud kitchen model may suit you best. We spoke with Manon Nassar, Group CEO of AWJ Investments, about the cloud kitchen business and the fact that the headline is now in 2021 saying, oh, you want to start a restaurant, don't even bother looking for a location, do a cloud kitchen, tells you we're making a whole lot of progress in that direction. And the next headline from India says cloud kitchens and are the future of restaurants. Why cloud kitchens? Why cloud kitchens are the future of restaurants. Cloud kitchens as a concept was gaining popularity even before the pandemic struck, but now they've become more lucrative and can operate blah, 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 blah. And they are optimal in nearly every possible way, financially speaking. So it looks like we're going to see a tremendous boom going forward of cloud kitchens, which means an absolute death of traditional restaurants, unless they themselves become cloud kitchens to address the existential threat of cloud kitchens, which indeed it is. So
it's kind of Airbnb on the restaurant side now, correct?
Kind of, yeah. That's one way to. I'm trying to think of it. It's more like Uber for food. Is maybe an even better way to think of it. That you don't need to buy a car. You can. Well, it's tricky. It's its own kind of beast. But
it's closer. It's the cloud is the better term, right? The cloud, it's literally a service, right?
Yep.
On a system. So cloud seems to make sense. And you know what's interesting here on these things is we define restaurants in a certain way. We define any industry or anything in a certain way, and that's just basically in our heads, right? We assume that the kitchen is on the premise. We assume that but what is the essence of a restaurant? Just like in a shop, right? Like some of these shops, we assume they have to be warehouses. Effectively, physical stores are little warehouses, right? And then suddenly we kind of like, if you redefine it, you basically, it's an experience, right? So if a restaurant is fundamentally an experience, fundamentally, so that experience can be in your home with a bunch of friends, or it could be in a place where some strangers are sitting there and there's some nice decor around you. And then the kitchen is part of it, and then there's an assumption that freshness is to be nearby, right? And that's what these things challenge. And I mean, if you think about the entire industry of keeping restaurants in place, keeping them hygienic, keeping them standardized, because that's a key part of reasonable restaurants, is that you can trust them, right? The food, you're not going to get food poisoning. You're going to get the ingredients that you assume you're going to get generally. And those kind of standards are hard to manage in these restaurants by local authorities, etc. You have a cloud kitchen, you have one visit, you check them all out, right? And if you want it, and the other assumption is that the team, the cook team, right? The chef, the master chef, and then the team around that person that the chef shouts at and does it. There's a kind of a culture there. Well, you can have that culture within a cloud kitchen, and you just have sections, right? Different sections, and you have your own little culture or whatever you want to do. So there's just an absolute direction here that I don't see a force against it. It's a little like e-commerce a few years back, right? So it's powerful.
I think the food inspector may be the force against it, though. I mean, that's something to sort of, I do agree with you in principle that one could have a place that was even under better scrutiny, but I think that that's going to be kind of challenging to actually implement in a serious way in city after city after city where this is going on. Remember,
no, but the food inspector just has to go to one place now, right? Like, as opposed to like several different restaurants and kind of go into the restaurant. And so where would the force, wouldn't it be more efficient for the food inspector? They'd be happier, right, to go to one place.
Right.
Or not one place, but many, like fewer visits.
Yes. I mean, I think the other side of this too is obviously a real estate question, right? Because I think Tyler Cowen wrote this book a while back about the economics of the restaurant industry. And I forget the name of the book off the top of my head, but essentially his argument was that the best place to eat is actually the suburbs rather than the city, because the price of land is relatively cheaper in the suburbs than the city, and that people go to restaurants there to be seen, and that's part of the experience. But essentially, if you eliminate the back, kitchen, that you might actually, save on rent, save on that sort of thing. But I don't know that would necessarily work, because isn't it sort of the fun of going to eat at like a nice expensive restaurant that you meet the chef and you build this sort of personal relationship? How much people want that sort of commoditized? Like, I don't know.
Okay, so just quickly, let me come in here. So you have to look at it from the perspective of takeout, not the actual restaurant itself. So about 3 years ago, I actually did launch this similar sort of like initiative. But in third world countries, like you don't have these food inspectors coming into the location and then looking at the kitchen and all the, hygiene standards being met and all those kind of things. So you can very easily do that in those part of the world. So the way to do it is to actually ask and sign up people, like similarly as the actual Uber signs up the drivers, that you sign up people who are actually going to be cooking in their kitchen, instead of actually cooking for 4 people, whatever their family size is. You could double that number, or like whatever the capacity you have, and then you put them into the app and say, here you go, this is what I've cooked today, and you can actually order it online. And then you have multiple dishes in that particular app that where you can actually order. And then you partner with one of the actual delivery guys, which is going to be Uber or Cream or whichever it is, and they simply in a DoorDash style, like literally picking up that from that particular house, that and then getting it delivered where the order actually came from. So this is how it's been working in the third world country, that is in one app. Then many people around the city has been cooking in their house, and that very app owner, or like whatever the actual management is actually making sure that those kitchens are following that hygiene and all that kind of standards as Uber does with the drivers. So that's the particular model, and that's how it's going to be followed.
Way to think about Uber, though, and the reason the U.S. government permitted Uber in a lot of ways was because Uber was essentially taking on the mob by eliminating the taxi cab industries in these major cities. And that was sort of like a major reason why a lot of regulators looked the other way on that. I mean, could one make the case that the restaurant industry, has a sort of maybe potential mobbish connection? There's all sorts of restaurants that kind of lose money that are sort of helped out. And I mean, there's all sorts of questions of restaurants and money laundering questions around that. I mean, could one make the case that the food kitchen or the cloud kitchen is really like a solution to that larger issue? I don't know, but that's sort of how I would think about it.
Okay, next headline.
You have to look at, just quickly, 10 seconds. So you have to look at it from that perspective that, you are empowering those women who are actually cooking, and they're getting extra, little bit of income. So that also a great angle from the wealth generation. Thank you.
Not just women, men can cook too. Very well.
Ran
Sure.
kitchens for a decade, so yeah, testament to that.
Okay, here we go. So the next big headline is Chinese digital yuan already used in $5 billion of transactions. And we had heard it's been used by 1 million people in a headline recently. And now we've got another data point to connect to that. So $5 billion of transactions. A hunger crisis forces Guatemalans to choose migration or death is the headline from National Geographic. And which will they choose, everybody? Starvation or death? Let's contemplate this for a second here. A hunger crisis forces Guatemalans to choose migration or death in the first dispatch from a new series on migration in the Americas. National Geographic looks at how hunger is forcing migrants to flee Guatemala. So will they choose migration or death? Anyone have an answer?
Migration. How's that?
You're guessing migration. Okay. Well, we will find out in the next episode of Climate Change Jeopardy. And that's from National Geographic. So I just tweeted that one out. And the UK eyes removing China's CGN, which is China General Nuclear Corporation, in energy plans as ties fray, which you're going to start any day now. You're going to start seeing headlines about the great decoupling. That's one of the easiest predictions I've ever made, because that's what people that are behind all of this are referring to it as, and it's just a matter of time before the journalists figure it out and then tell it to your cousins and coworkers that this great decoupling, and the UK's in on it with the US, as is Europe and all the US partners. UK to move ahead on nuclear project without China support. Government is exploring ways to remove China from projects, a nuclear power project. British Premier Johnson is hardening stance towards Beijing. Yep, and that's going to go on for the next 5,000 years, and we're going to decouple. That's what it's called, the Great Decoupling. You heard it here first, and you will start soon in next month. Give it 2 months, you'll start hearing it everywhere else. And that's the UK decoupling from China on nuclear power. And then Shanghai at standstill with a typhoon set to roll out. China evacuates over 100,000 as typhoon lands in eastern China. And evacuation of 100,000 people due to stronger than usual typhoons. Which, anyone want to guess what's causing these unusually strong typhoons? Let's contemplate this for a second here. What might be causing these unusually strong typhoons that need to evacuate 100,000 people? Anyone got a guess?
Democrats.
Climate change.
TSMC mulls Germany and Japan plans to diversify its supply chain. As we talked about, Intel wants to become less dependent on key infrastructure points like semiconductors and medicines and all kinds of things. This is going to be reshoring all of that stuff. And TSMC also wants to diversify they're looking at Japan and China at the moment. Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing companies in the early stages of considering a new chip making plant in Germany, as the chairman, Mark Liu, told shareholders. And we talked about the baby boom in China and how to make a baby boom. And we didn't really talk about it, but I just tweeted that one out in case you want to do your deep dive on that. Indeed, China wants to make a baby boom because that's going to be a tricky pyramid to balance on its head like that. Chinese jobs inside the world's biggest work fairs. We talked about that. And Chinese education tycoon loses $15 billion as shares plunge 98%, is the headline from Bloomberg. Larry Chen, the former school teacher who became one of the world's richest people, has lost his billionaire status. Not just he went from 15 billion to zero. He was a 15 billionaire, 15 times billionaire, who's now is going to be sleeping on your sofa because China just cracked down on edtech companies, which he was a big investor in. And no love for China stocks as a sell-off unites UBS, BlackRock in regard action against Beijing policy. Regulatory squeeze on the education sector erased at least $5.8 billion from 15 Hong Kong listed tutoring firms, and we saw similar on the U.S. exchanges on Friday. And that was our friend, the former school teacher. That was a lot of his money. Ion Air battery backed by.
Hi, Tyler.
Hello. Was that Messi?
Hi.
Hey, Messi.
Quick question. Hi.
Is that you? How are you?
How you doing, Messi? How you doing?
I'm all right. I've been just hiding, but I have been talking. Just a very, very quick question. Don't you think this is going to spook any investor trying to invest in China or even any other, semi-authoritarian maybe kind of countries in any sector? Don't you think that's a spooky a bit?
Yep. The answer is yes, Messi. We don't think, we know. You can you can bet every penny you can get your hands on the very simple answer of absolutely.
Scary. Sorry.
Investing in China is over, Messi. I'm sorry. Did you have big investments in Tencent?
No, I can't even get out.
Okay, well that's a relief. But
Messi, you didn't hear yesterday one of the billionaires in China is struck off from the list because he lost 98% of his shares.
$15 billion. No, but
yes.
I invited Messi. It's a good question. And I had the same question 2 days ago when the headlines first revealed themselves. And so I pinged in a friend of mine who's a very big investor internationally as a partner in Qualcomm Ventures, where they do invest in China as well. And I said, have you seen the headlines today about the ed tech companies? He said, absolutely, I have. I said, did you see what happened to Didi? He said, of course I did. I said, what kind of message does this send to the big VC investors? He says, it's telling them to run the fuck away as fast as you fucking can from China and pray to God.
The party giveth and the party taketh away.
It's over. The game's over. There's no more investing in tech in China, especially from people outside of China. Due to that last headline that we read, that an ed tech investor in China lost $15 billion, 98% of his net worth, I'm pretty sure it means the end of tech investing even inside China and outside China.
Yeah, and also I'm just wondering if that has kind of a ripple effect. Like here in Africa, China investment
I
is
think
all
it's
over the
fantastic
place,
for
right?
Africa.
Yeah, do you think they're gonna just
Well,
move
you've got
here?
about $100 billion looking for a new place to put its money.
On that point, there's a story that comes out of the UK, which is the UK is investigating mining deals in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where foreign companies allegedly made bribes totaling $360 million. And this is all in the rare earth minerals space.
Would you be interested in some democracy, Messi?
Yes,
Because
but
we can bring it to
it's a
you.
murky, it's a very murky business
Okay.
here in Africa as well. So yeah, and to me, it's just a little bit of worrisome. Is also there is a ton of investment all over Africa by the Chinese, state Chinese companies, private Chinese companies who have been subsidized. You name it. Like here in Ethiopia, there has been like just a ton of public investment from China. Would it
Damn,
be affected by it? So I'm baffled by this whole thing. But anyway, yeah.
dam that the Egyptians don't particularly care for, right? All the guarantees on that dam over the Nile in
Yeah.
Ethiopia.
She's
But I want to
familiar. We've
ask
talked about it.
Messi one
Yeah.
question. Messi, question. Because you have
Yeah.
lived in Africa, right? So from your experience, do you think you are better off with the US support or better off with the Chinese support in investment?
Are you trying to get me in trouble?
No,
Um,
no, just be
yeah.
objective. Yeah, we are all
She's trying to
Yes.
find
Malaysian.
out if you work for the Ethiopian intelligence agency.
No, I work for myself.
Is
I
your life
think
better
Because
now or
you would be
before?
the best cover ever, Messi.
We will protect you at Tech News around the world.
Yeah. I am very, very privileged, honestly. Somebody was mentioning earlier that, we travel around with two passports and stuff. The first sign of trouble, you can always fly out. Embassies protect us and things like that. Even though I am still Ethiopian origin, I am Canadian. So I am very privileged. But from the investment perspective, I honestly was very, very iffy and concerned how the Chinese were investing. One of the things that really concerned me was they were pumping in a ton of, millions, billions actually, in the Ethiopian sector. And of course, we can talk about corruption as well. The public enterprise that was fueling the Ethiopian economic progress that has been growing, like what, even by IMF's estimation was 8% GDP for that last decade. And all of it is fueled by public investment, which is majority Chinese investment and all that. But they were just kind of, there wasn't any technology transfer. There wasn't anything. They bring in the Chinese, they build, they get out, the debt and all that, you name it. It was, for me, was the biggest concern. I talk about it. I have been always vocal about it. Even though there were a lot of supporters, they said, well, from the Western society, when they do bring the dollars, they have a stringent conditionality attached to it. But China, they just give it. And I always thought that they have a different agenda. So I am very happy to see, especially the U.S. A lot of investment is coming to counter the Chinese, full, big hold in Africa. So there is the blended financing, there is the multi-million AGWA initiatives, you name it. So To me, for Africa, it's great to have those competitions because at least they can leverage from both sides. So for me, it's a very, very welcome news to see the re-engagement of the U.S. I would say that.
Well, you're in Ethiopia, so you're familiar with the African Union building that China built for you there, right? In Addis Ababa.
Yeah,
Yeah.
don't get me started with that. This is part of what I have been saying. China has a really different agenda in a sense. They built the African Union building, and it was awesome. It was free, right? Free in quotations. But then we found out later on that it was bugged, and every African Union meetings from 54 different countries, not just 54 different countries, but also everybody else all over the world who come in to get engaged in the US was the data was being shipped every single time to China. So
They have all the
there is nothing
microphones and cameras then.
exactly, and they
Ooh,
deny it, of
that's
course.
juicy
But
data.
yeah,
It wasn't free.
absolutely,
It
nothing is
wasn't
Nothing is
free.
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 Yeah, it's like Google. You're the
I,
product.
Yeah,
I'm
the smart city.
I'm reasonably informed that the Biden administration's policy when it comes to Africa is that they have no problem whatsoever with the Africans expropriating those Chinese loans. And so I think that's going to be a very interesting conversation. You'll note that Kabila was, of course, deposed in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the world's second lung is after Amazon. And it's sort of very interesting to see. And you'll note also that one of the countries that was implicated with the NSO scandal was Rwanda, where Paul Kagame is increasingly going a little crazy and stir crazy, thinking he's beset by enemies on all sides. So just an interesting place. I would look very closely at, I'd look very closely at the Clinton Global Initiative being sort of rolled back, and we already saw the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is now under sort of new management, new control after the after Bill Gates and Jeffrey Epstein had a great time traveling all around Africa together. So I think things are going to get very interesting in the Biden presidency,
The
and
the tricky
I
bit
might
is,
know more about this than I'm allowed to talk about. But
well, they
I would note that satellite technology is going to come into play.
defaulting on the Belt Road Initiative loans would be, in which Sri Lanka gave China complete kind of sovereign control of the port that they built there, and so
That assumes, of course, that China can come and collect the stuff in Africa that they default on, that the Africans default on, and
Yeah.
it'll be very interesting to see what the U.S. government does there.
You
Well,
know
there's
what's interesting? What's
the
interesting was that. Sorry. Go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead, Messi.
Go
Go
on,
ahead,
Messi.
Messi.
Go ahead, Messi.
What was interesting on what Charles just mentioned is that when the COVID was starting about, I guess, beginning of 2020, and then that, especially the prime minister here in Ethiopia, Abiy, was saying that, all countries need to think about the repayment of the debts and stuff. And of course, we really are up to our nose with the Chinese debt here. Like I said, a lot of infrastructure that was built here was Chinese debt, including some of the corruptions that the debt was just fueled and fueled. And I think the re-engagement of the U.S. With Prosper Africa, Power Africa, and all that. Even the private sector development, all of it, some of it I'm heavily involved in. And it was amazing to see that China felt like they were being a little bit like neglected. So they just came in Ethiopia and they said, okay, we're not really forgiving the debt, but we are taking off the interest that has been accumulated. So it was just trying to really get into that to counter what was the U.S. re-engagement. But they are doing huge, I think, even the last few years before the Biden administration, even earlier, that they were getting concerned how China was really monopolizing the African government, even the autocrats as well, all over, by giving money and just unsolicited debts that some leaders don't even get concerned because it's not their debt, it's the country's debt, and some of them may just run away, right? So I think that's what China was a little bit concerned last year and tried to give a favorable kind of terms and the interest and things like that. And it would be quite interesting for me to see going forward what China would do, because there has been a lot of activities coming in from the US side.
Okay. So
There is another angle, just quickly. There is another angle
10
apart from
seconds.
actually, sure, just quickly on the actual defaulting on the debt part. Recently, I don't know how many of you actually followed the news about about 8 Chinese engineers being got killed in one of the projects they were working in Pakistan on Dasu Dam.
Yes.
And because of the security issue, now the Gwadar, certain portion of it where the Chinese were like actually holding it, now they have totally compounded it. And now the Pakistan army cannot actually go in. So here we go.
Yeah.
Wink, wink.
Yes, there was an explosion near the hydroelectric dam near the Pakistan-Chinese border in the northern part, in the foothills of the Khyber Pass there near the Himalayas. And the bus had the Chinese engineers who were responsible for kind of managing the dam project. Those roads, by the way, if you're familiar with that part of the world, are carved into the sides of mountains, basically, and they would not pass any safety standards in other parts of the world. And so it didn't take much of a bomb to push the bus down the cliff, down into the bottom of the valley, which obviously killed everybody on board, which was the engineering team on that. The question is, and so China has gotten very upset about this, understandably. And the first comment from the kind of Secretary of State was that from China was, or like the foreign minister, was that they were encouraging Pakistan to find and give extreme punishment to the people involved. And as of yet, they've not found anyone involved. And of course, who would be behind such a thing and what's going on there. And so China's now starting to question the logic of investing as heavily as they did into Pakistan, perhaps. So it's going to be interesting to see how that one unfolds. But other interesting headlines is kind of on a similar point. This from what is International Business Times. I haven't seen that title, that publication name in a while. Tibetan group opposes Beijing hosting the Winter Olympics next year, calls for a diplomatic boycott on the Winter Olympics in Beijing. And here we go. This is going to be called the Genocide Games. I'm predicting it right now. That is an incredibly easy prediction. In fact, it's not a prediction at all. I've already heard it referred to as the Genocide Games. And Tibet is going to be the first of many countries to boycott this games. The Tibetan organization located in Switzerland have filed a complaint with the International Olympic Committee as calls for a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Winter Olympics have become louder. 4 Tibetan organizations based in Switzerland have filed a complaint against the IOC with the Swiss National Contact Point in Bern for the alleged violation of OECD guidelines over the awarding of the 22 Winter Olympics to Beijing. The OECD guidelines obligate multinational enterprises such as the IOC to respect international recognized human rights and to carry out human rights due diligence for its activities. So they're going to have to do an investigation. Interesting. Due diligence for its activities, such as maybe the due diligence is exclusive to the site where the games are held, which will not be in Xinjiang, of course, or in Tibet, obviously. But however, the IOC has steadfastly ignored the calls of rights-based organizations for carrying out human rights due diligence, despite concerns of widespread human rights violations by China, sources said. There are now growing calls for a diplomatic boycott of Beijing Winter Olympics. And as we get closer, indeed, that's going to become a shit show. So, retweeting that one, and
I just want our Chinese friends to know that I'm fully willing and able to perform in any of the Olympic Games as needed should the American team boycott.
And there is been proposals that there should be very layperson, untrained athletes in each event, just to show the audience at home how superior the athletes are in their endeavors, just to give people a quantifiable measure of just how slow Charles really swims, and so that people can see.
That's right. I'm happy to go and get the lowest ranking in everything on behalf of my country, and so that the real athletes stay home and don't breathe the polluted Chinese air.
Well, it's not so much
or
that.
participate
We would just
in
like to
their.
see what a mortal human looks like doing the floor gymnastics. You know.
Oh, I'm far below a normal human on that.
So this car design called a Pininfarina Torema. That's the car, all in one word. 2 words, actually. Concept showcased with living room like interiors is an incredibly futuristic car indeed. Features holographic AR displays and autonomous driving, where the interior has been designed to be a social place because the car's driving itself. You can focus on other things, like hanging out in Clubhouse. So the car itself is quite mind-blowing, and it's potentially a look at what one company thinks the future of cars looks like. You really have to see it. It's on the Tech News Twitter account at TNATW. Now, our Iron Air batteries, backed by Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates, promises storage at a fraction of the cost. If this happens, this could have the biggest impact on reducing CO2 of pretty much anything. A lot of people are potentially excited about iron air batteries, including Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates. And it says Form Energy, a Boston-based startup backed by some of the world's richest people, has unveiled its new long-duration battery storage technology that it claims will store energy at 1/10 the cost of traditional lithium-ion battery storage system. Why is that important? Let me explain. As somebody whose entire tropical island resort is 100% exclusively powered by lithium-ion batteries, let me explain that if we come up with a replacement or improvement which is 10 times more effective, which would then make the batteries 1/10 the cost, that would then push everything into solar and wind being stored through batteries. It would become way, 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 way cheaper than anybody paying, even your local power companies. Way cheaper. Way, way, way cheaper. Or another way to look at it is when you buy batteries for your home and you put solar panels or wind or whatever, if you build a hydroelectric dam behind your house or whatever, the power system that you build for yourself will cost you usually about 10 years of what it costs you when you're living in your home with a wire to the city. If you're living as a domesticated animal on the grid, like a circus animal in a cage, if you're part of the domesticated circus animal group that live on the grid, then it will, in the amount of money you spend for that electricity, you could have bought your own independent energy system. And currently it takes about 10 years to pay back with the current technologies of the price of solar panels and wind turbines and lithium batteries. But if the price of batteries drops 90%, then you could probably pay that back in about 16 months. So you would then be an absolute idiot to not switch over to having your own independent system with batteries if this price does happen. If this salt air technology happens and the price of batteries drops 90%, everybody is going to switch over to having their own batteries and solar and everything. And then there'll be a mad rush globally on every scale, from the smallest doghouse to the biggest factory. Everything will switch over to this system. And so there's as you can understand, that's why the opportunity is so tremendous that people like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos can't help but want to be involved if that has any chance of happening. So it doesn't mean that it is happening. In fact, Milos last week checked with him. I asked him about a week ago, who's a bit of an expert on batteries, and he says he still thinks it's a ways off, like 10 or 20 years. But anyway, this headline says the relatively secret Form Energy has been working on the science behind its new long-duration battery storage technology for some time now, and last May announced a pilot battery project led by Minnesota-based Great River Energy. That project, part of Great River Energy's plans to eliminate coal from its portfolio and build 1,000 megawatts of wind energy, promised a 1 megawatt Aquas Air battery with 150 megawatt hours of storage potential that is said was a game-changing technology. Those claims attracted investors, Amazon, Jeff Bezos, and Bill Gates, along with Australia's Macquarie Capital. After more than a year of secrecy, Form Energy has finally unveiled the chemistry of its multi-day storage battery technology. At the same time, it has also announced $200 million Series D funding from Luxembourg steel giant ArcelorMittal X-Carb Innovation Fund. It describes the technology as a rechargeable iron-air battery capable of delivering electricity for 100 hours at system cost competitive with conventional power plants and at less than 1/10 the cost of lithium-ion. The battery is made from iron, on one of the safest, cheapest, and most abundant materials on the earth, meaning that it can be made more cheaply than lithium-ion batteries, which require a number of expensive rare earth metals. Iron is used in combination with water and air and works on the principle of reversible rusting. According to Form Energy, when the battery discharges, it breathes in oxygen from the air and converts iron
This
metal.
is fantastic.
Yeah, if it works. And they're saying it's working. And that's why I asked Milos a week ago, there's companies now saying that they've got this working. Is it working? And he says he didn't think it is. But this PR release is giving strong indications that it is. At least they're really pushing.
I would say, I know Russell Gold, who wrote this piece for the Journal, and he would not write this story if it were a PR piece.
This is the key to using Mars as a fuel base for going everywhere else, because you have tons of rust on Mars, and if you use this in a reverse redox a reaction, you can harvest all that rust on Mars and use it for energy.
You have to be very careful in any of these things. There's liquid metal batteries. I'm sure anyone in clean tech has looked at lots and lots of batteries over the years that were promised to be this way. I actually hope this one
You just need to understand physics, Dan. No, you just need to understand physics and not have a motive.
No. But there's a difference between the lab and moving to manufacturing. A123 got in trouble when they shifted over to manufacturing, had a few mistakes along the way. So it's all exciting. It's great, actually. And of course, lithium ion is coming down in price this decade. It dropped 80% in the last 10 years, which is just mind boggling. And if it continues on that way, it'll be not quite as low as this one, but, decently low. And it's a very exciting time for energy storage.
Tyler, have you actually tweeted this yet? I can't actually
I'm
find it.
I'm going to tweet it right now for you, Carl. Here it comes. Let me read a bit more of this because people are certainly understandably and correctly fired up about it. They claim we conducted a broad review of available technologies and have reinvented the iron air battery to optimize it for multi-day energy storage for the electrical grid, said the CEO. With this technology, we are tackling the biggest barrier to deep dark carbonization, making renewable energy available when and where it's needed, even during multiple days of extreme weather and grid outages. Form Energy claims that their iron air batteries are the best solution to balance the multi-day variability of renewable energy due to extreme low cost, safety, durability, and global scalability, both modular and scalable, with each individual battery measuring in at around the same size of a washing machine, which is exactly what I have here in lithium ion. The battery modules can be grouped together in a modular megawatt scale power blocks, which comprise thousands of battery modules in an environmentally protected enclosure. In addition to unveiling the chemistry of their new iron air battery technologies, they also announced the beginnings of a $200 million Series D financing round led by that Swiss company, which also worked jointly with the development of iron materials, which the company will non-exclusively supply for Form Energy. Oh, that's a clever collaboration. They're getting their financing from an iron company, essentially. And Form Energy will source the necessary iron domestically and manufacture the battery systems near the location at the promised Great River Energy pilot project. Form Energy is the leading edge of developments in long-duration grid-scale battery storage space, said Global Head of Research and Development. The multi-day energy storage technology they have developed holds exciting potential to overcome the issues of intermittent supply and renewable energy. They are exactly the kind of ambitious and innovative company we're seeking to invest, and that's classic PR boilerplate language. So let's see the data. Let's see a report. Let's see Bill Gates
So
make a statement.
I've heard about this company very, very positive things, and so I'm looking at LinkedIn, the number of mutual friends we have in common, all serious folks, and I this is an extremely exciting one to watch, and I tend to be very pessimistic on a lot of clean tech
Wall
technologies.
Street Journal just did the article where it says startup claims breakthrough in long duration batteries. Other outlets covering it is Energy Storage News. The New York Times mentioned them 2 weeks ago, where they said Energy Department targets vastly cheaper batteries to clean up the grid. And they just mentioned them as one of the other companies working on new battery chemistries. So that doesn't really count. A stock picking website also says Bezos battery to beat Tesla at its own game. And it'll be interesting.
It's interesting,
Yeah.
by the way, it's interesting, just for those who are curious, how many people have decamped Tesla to work at this company, which is kind of interesting.
Oh, they have former Tesla folks there at Forum?
Yes, including the CEO. I believe
he was an ex-executive,
yeah.
Interesting.
Just to know, just to be very clear about this, Russell Gold, I think he's now going to go work at Texas Monthly, and I've dealt with him in the past, and he's very, very good. So he would not have his swan song story in the Wall Street Journal be a PR puff piece.
Uh-huh.
And again, like I said, it's just physics. Like, so if you understand how most reactions work.
Oh my God! Yeah, check.
You know,
Chris, here's what you want. It says Forum Energy's $20 per kilowatt hour, which is the golden thing we were chasing was $100 kilowatt hours, and they're claiming they're at $20 per kilowatt hour.
Yeah, and like I said, this will turn Mars into a huge reserve of fuel to launch rockets off of.
Somerville, Massachusetts-based startup Forum Energy on Thursday announced the chemistry for an iron-air exchange battery that could offer long-duration storage at a price of less than $20 per kilowatt hour. Holy shit! If this is real, this is the biggest we've ever read in tech news.
It looks a little bit like this is like the reason why it's 100 watt hours, why it's such a large battery basically, and that's what they're talking about, is because it's a hydrolysis battery. So it's using that system, filtering air through and then transferring back and forth between rust, it has to be so huge because it's going to be very slow to charge, going to be very slow to discharge. Apologies for the dog. And it's going to have really bad efficiency. So it's really good if you're talking about huge amounts of energy that you want to store for a long amount of time, but they aren't going to be putting this in cars or planes or anything like that anytime soon.
So the CEO, before joining this company, was at Tesla between August 2009 and December 2016. So he spent 7 years at Tesla, first as a director of powertrain business development, and then director of Tesla Energy, and then VP.
What was his name?
His name is Matteo Jaramillo. And he said, as director of Tesla Energy, he started stationary energy storage effort at Tesla, and stationary energy storage means Powerwall. And currently responsible for global sales, business development, deployment, and operations. Previously in a parallel was commercial lead at OEM powertrain sales, blah, blah, blah. And then he went to VP of products and programs for Tesla Energy. So he was running Powerwall, basically.
So I'm wondering if this is a direction he wanted to take Powerwall in while he was there, and they deemed it not sufficient enough for what they needed to do for a B2C sort of scenario.
We have two mutual connections on LinkedIn, which are Peter Carlson from Northvolt, and no doubt Peter knows him very well because they were there all during those same, many years. And Peter's doing building one of the biggest battery factories on the planet at the moment. And this would be, in some sense, disruptive to the lithium battery factory they're building now, but amazingly complementary to the future factory that they're now fundraising for the second Northvolt factory. So there's no doubt in my mind that Peter has intimate knowledge of what Form is doing, because they would be one of the first big users of this technology. So I will ping Peter to ask him about this in this headline. And then Sam Teller, the other mutual connection, was Elon Musk's chief of staff for SpaceX and Tesla and the tunneling company. What do they call it? Boring and Neuralink. So he was the chief of staff for all of Elon's companies, which means he's Elon Musk's right-hand guy, which he was. He literally shadowed him on every flight he took for until he resigned about a year ago. And so Sam will also obviously know about Matteo and
My, it sure is interesting how many people are resigning from Tesla these days, huh? What do you think about?
Sam went to Sam, and I can tell you why. In part, I mean, Peter left for a huge reason, because of the huge opportunity to do Northvolt to get batteries to the Germans, but also because working at Tesla during those years was, practically unbearable. And Sam, I mean, it's kind of well known that Elon lives a practically unlivable life that most humans would not be able to keep up with. And Sam, who I knew even before he joined Elon to be his right-hand man at Tesla and SpaceX and Boring and Neuralink, he was just a friend in LA, and he came and used to fly to my events in Sweden just to jump on stage and say hi. And then now he's started a new gig as a VC, which makes perfect. He was doing that before he joined Elon, actually, so that makes perfect sense. I think after 7 to 10 years, it's just hard to keep up. People get burnt out, and
I don't know about that. I think it's interesting to note that Musk got a series of contracts that have all been security reviewed and delayed. There's, of course, the litigation against Elon that's going on in a Delaware courtroom.
Solar City, yeah.
Correct. I would not be very long Elon right now. That would just be something we'll revisit this. Mm-hmm. Just remember that I said it here.
Okay. Yeah,
Tyler, I have a
the solar one could sting. That's a $2 billion suit. Yeah, go ahead, Karam.
So basically, Indiana to test highways which can charge EVs while they're moving, and that's just amazing if that happens. So they are going to use this special sort of like a cement, which is going to be magnetized
cement, yeah.
And Indiana, Transport Department actually working with the Purdue University, and
yes,
they're talking to this German company which is called Megament, which is sort of like they're calling
magnet.
That.
Yeah, we read this about 4 days ago.
Oh, sorry.
That's
okay.
Right.
Yeah,
it's super interesting. And let's pray to God that works too, because then cars could charge themselves while they drive. That's the real opportunity there. So with that,
Did you see the letter that Jeff Bezos sent NASA apropos of the
SpaceX deal? No,
with Blue Origin.
I didn't.
He essentially this was yesterday, I think, but he essentially said that he would cover the billions of dollars of costs if NASA would agree to let him, let Blue Origin compete for the contract.
Yes,
and
so smart.
That's pretty intense.
That is.
I mean, I suppose if you're, this is NASA Administrator Bill Nelson, who said always had a kind of a, he's from Florida. He's always had kind of a rough relationship with Elon. So I just find that a very interesting letter to get, and the timing of it is very interesting.
Yeah. So, but this $20 kilowatt hour, holy shit, that's cheap. So, looks like we might all be, and then there's, other people covering 1/10 the cost of lithium ion, Form Energy announces. It's getting a lot of pickups in the press. So that would be kind of very uncharacteristic of somebody of this pedigree to, do a scam like this to raise more money, especially when you already have Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos as investors, and the world waiting on its hands and knees for this technology. It would be, a company suicide to preemptively announce it when you don't really have the goods to deliver. So
it's different though than if they just announced it was for sale today at $20 kilowatt hour. Because by the time they do, bring it to the market, lithium will come down. Hopefully it's still going to be cheaper. It has obviously restrictions. It's not portable. It's for fixed energy storage versus lithium ion, which are perfect for cars and things like that. So there'll be more competition, but still, that's a breakthrough price if they can actually deliver on it. Sometime in the next 5 years, that would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
I think most of the hype is about the fact that Form Energy might be able to deliver mass market. The technology that they're actually using in these batteries has been around for a while. I think it's more the focus on the fact that they have a CEO that's worked in an industry, worked with a company who has done similar breakthroughs in energy, that being, Powerwall and Tesla and SolarCity and all of that through Matteo. And the Form Energy might actually be able to deliver some sort of mass market globally on this, but the technology that they're using themselves, the basis of it has been around for quite a while. Also, unfortunately, although it's getting a lot of press coverage at the moment, a lot of these are just regurgitating the press release from Form Energy themselves.
Yes. Well, that's very common, by the way. So what happens is the company puts out a press release saying, here's what we did, and then the journalists regurgitate it in their own language. I mean, that's the game.
What'll be really interesting with these is lifetime. Like, how long do they last? Yep. What's the kind of maintenance that's required on these? I mean, normally you get less than 50% efficiency on these systems, but if you install it and it lasts 20 years, and that's great. If you install it and it lasts a year, right, and then you've got to open them up again and change out sort of panels and whatnot, then that's a different story. But we'll see. Somebody to watch.
So this article,
if it's 50%, batteries are usually way more than. If it was 50%, that would be a real downside. If it was that low on something like this, it better be up in the.
No, it really is. It really is because of the way that it's doing it, because it's using electrolysis, and it's a slow, inefficient process that doing, but it can store at large amounts for long periods. So
right, but the round trip efficiency is a key thing for a battery, right? You put in a certain amount of energy and you get a certain amount out. On a lithium ion battery, 90%, something like that. And
yeah, exactly.
Hydrogen fuel cells, by the way, are super inefficient. The round trip efficiency is something like 30%. So if this is 50, okay, it might have, and it's cheap. You'll find certain applications for it, but that would be kind of a waste. It means you need a lot more renewable energy to put into it.
Well, the thing is that 50 quote is like the average for the current technology. They haven't released numbers with this, so maybe they've done something different. Maybe it's way above the efficiency of pre-existing, which is why you've got the likes of Bills at Gates and Bezos interested. But we don't know until they release more information.
Did anyone notice the appendage at the bottom of the article and the Wall Street Journal that says that they had previously announced that the deal closed, but that the round was still open? I thought that was an interesting sort of errata.
That's what has me. That's my only concern, is that they're trying to fundraise off of this, and so we'll see. No. I mean, that's why you do something like this. If you're not ready to, the only reason to make this announcement is, attract investors. Essentially, is the obvious reason, and
well, that and the funding cycle for the Department of Energy just opened on July 1st.
Green energy, it's really interesting. Let's hope they make an announcement soon that to let people order these things. Or
well, they got 70 million investment at the latter end of 2020. So
right, but the Department of Energy is the largest funder of this sort of thing, and their cycle to direct public funds for this sort of work just opened, I believe, on July 1st. Typically, is when it opens. And the Biden administration, just like the Obama administration before it, was extremely willing to use public monies to develop these sorts of technologies. So I think that might also come to play here as well. If you recall, Tesla, got a huge loan from the Obama administration. It's sort of continuation of that sort of thing.
It's going to be interesting if you end up with a back and forth between these two companies, where you've got Powerwall installations already been used in disaster zones and whatnot, and being put up relatively quickly. Like, how does it compare if you're talking about you want sort of megawatt, gigawatt installations of Powerwalls versus Form Energy installations? How long does each last? What's the efficiency of each one? What's the safety precautions of each one? What's the installation, the maintenance like?
wall has a head start on this. I don't know if they're interested in this.
Well,
talking about, Charles.
Moving on here. Hold on. So there's a, speaking of EVs, say hello to France's toaster-like vehicle for teens. So we also, and I just tweeted this out so you can see it, and it's basically Peugeot's copy of the Chinese Wuling $4,000 vehicle. And funny that they're marketing it towards teens because it is a slightly smaller car. So you need to be a slightly smaller individual. Certainly,
It's interesting that they say it's toaster on wheels.
Yeah, it looks like a little toaster. And France budget electric vehicle looks like a toaster, and is sold like one too. Citroen's mobility object is a small two-seater. Think of it as a four-wheeled moped. No driver's license needed. And thank you for that, Poppy. And then the next one is Active Fence comes out of the shadows with $100 million in funding and tech that detects online harm, now valued at $500 million, detects online harm. What the hell does that mean? Online abuse, disinformation, fraud, and other malicious content is growing and getting more complex to track. Today, a startup called Active Fence, which has quietly built a tech platform to suss out threats as they're being formed and planned. How are you doing that? To make it easier for trust and safety teams to combat them on platforms, is coming out of the shadows to announce a significant funding on the back of a surge of large organizations using its service. The startup, co-headquartered in New York and Tel Aviv, oh boy, here we go again. Oh, Jesus. Raised $100 million, funding that it will be used to continue developing its tools and to continue expanding its customer base. I bet, what is the date on that? July 27. Came out today. Well, Pegasus might put a wrinkle in their plans. Because it's very likely that they're using some a bit of shady stuff in the background. Let's put it that way. As it says, today a startup called Active Fence, which has quietly built a tech platform to suss out threats as they're being formed and planned to make it easier for trust and safety teams to combat them on platforms. It's coming out of the shadows to announce significant fundraising. And they raised $100 million funding, and it will continue to develop the tools and to continue expanding its customer base. To date, ActiveFence says that its customers include companies in social media, audio and video streaming, file sharing, gaming, marketplaces, and other technologies. It has yet to disclose any specific names, but says that its tools collectively cover billions of users. Governments and brands are two other categories that it is targeting as it continues to expand. Oh boy. It has been around since 2018 and is growing around 100% annually. The $100 million being announced today actually covers two rounds led by CRV, Charles River Ventures, and Highland Europe, as well as Series A, it never announced, led by Grove Ventures and Norwest Venture Partners. Vintage Investment Partners, Resolute Ventures, and other unnamed backers also participated. It's not disclosing valuation, but I understand it's over $500 million. Here's the quote: "We are very honored to be Active Fence partners from the very earliest days of the company and to be part of this important journey to make the internet a safer place and see their unprecedented success with the world's leading internet platforms," said Lawton Levkovitz, general partner at Grove Ventures, in a statement. The increased presence of social media and other chatter on other platforms has put a strong spotlight on how those forums are used by bad actors to spread malicious content. Active Fence's particular approach is a set of algorithms to tap into innovations in AI, natural language processing, to map relationships between conversations. It crawls all the obvious and less obvious and harder to reach parts of the internet to pick up on chatter that is typically where a lot of the malicious content and campaigns are born, some 3 million sources in all, before they become higher profile issues. It's built both on the concept of big data analytics, as well as understanding that the long tail of content online has a value if it can be tapped effectively. Here's a quote: "We take a fundamentally different approach to trust, safety, and content moderation," says Noam Schwartz, the co-founder and CEO, said in an interview. "We are proactively searching the darkest corners of the web and looking for bad actors in order to understand the sources of malicious content. Our customers then know what's coming. They don't need to wait for the damage or for internal research teams to identify the next scam or disinformation campaign. We work with some of the most important companies in the world, but even tiny, super niche platforms have risks. The insights that ActiveFence gathers are then packaged up into an API that its customers can then feed into whatever other systems they use to track and migrate traffic. And call me crazy. But is it possible that this is Pegasus for enterprise companies? That essentially Pegasus sells to governments, and this company says they sell to governments as well. But is it possible they are actually able to find out in advance what the bad actions could be because they have some access and they figure out who the bad actors are and monitor those bad actors for potential future bad activities and these big platforms like Facebook and Google and everybody have the rather difficult challenge of doing all of this, stopping all of this bad behavior on these platforms. Well, what if they could, although they wouldn't want to do it because then they would be caught and that would, it would be the end of their companies. So they could hire a company with plausible deniability who has technologies similar to Pegasus to be able to get into everybody's phones and figure out who the bad actors really are, so we could preemptively kind of pre-shadow ban them before the content even gets on the platform. These platforms are spending absurd amounts of money. In fact, I know they're spending it with my friends in Manila called TaskUs, which is about 30,000 team members in Manila who are, manually dealing with this impossible task of content moderation on these, global platforms with billions of users.
It's sort of apropos of what you were saying. There's announced today there was PayPal partnering with the ADL to fight extremism on various platforms that PayPal operates on, and of course the ADL, for those who are uninitiated, there's a lot of longstanding connections with the ADL and the Israeli intelligence services, Mossad. And that's sort of well-established sort of connections. In the late 60s, the FBI suspected that the ADL was a proxy for the state of Israel. So sort of worth
Could
sort
we
of.
stop all of this stuff already? It turns out, that Gary Lauder is not Israeli. He's an American citizen. I mean, you're just spouting off things because I think some Israeli companies, beat you to some business. And I'm not saying that was fair or not, but, I mean, there's a lot of stuff you're saying just
No, it's
isn't true.
actually quite true, Ken. In fact, the firm you mentioned earlier, that was one of the larger investors there, was also a major benefactor of Newt Gingrich. And Gary Lauder, I mean, I mentioned, and look, Gary is a friend of mine. I mean, Gary and I know each other quite well. You
He's
can
not
actually,
Israeli, right?
no, he's he's an American supporter of Israeli causes, and he's quite proud of that.
Oh, that's okay.
So
That's different, though. Okay, yeah, okay.
okay, but the main firm that you mentioned is actually in trouble with the SEC.
Which firm is that?
If you want to mention it again, we can go through it if you want.
Oh,
It's the one.
I know that it's a firm I don't even know. I got it off the proxy
Yeah, on the
filing.
proxy listing. Go and Google the name of the proxy thing, and you'll pull it up. But if
Yeah.
you want to talk about the 1960s and the ADL and how the ADL was involved and was identified by the FBI as being a proxy for the state of Israel, this is well established stuff. I mean, it's not a controversial thing. And as for you know, as for the Israeli firms beating me to business. In the case of Clearview, I think is probably the one you're mentioning.
Yeah.
In the case of Clearview, well, the FBI is investigating SoftBank as we speak, and they're investigating the NSO Group, and of course, AnyVision, which is the one that just got money from SoftBank, is sort of also something worth poking around on. Now, look, Ken, we can have a very sensible conversation about Israeli technology companies. I happen to favor a lot of Israeli technology companies. I've happened to start businesses with Israelis, but we also need to be mindful
that sometimes the state of Israel, for its own security, oftentimes engages in practices that other nation states shy away from and try to police.
I would not disagree with any of that, but let's not, conflate certain things. I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. Israel does what Israel does, whatever. Okay, but I mean, the second largest shareholder, by the way, of Sharpshooter when they went public was Motorola after Gary Lauder.
Yes, and go and Google Motorola's connections with the state of Israel. That's a well-established thing as well.
Well, a lot of multinational companies have
Look,
connections with
the
many
the
countries.
Lauder family is a highly respected family of American Jews, many of whom are supporters of Israel. They're sort of large donors to that. Gary, by the way, actually defended Clearview in a discussion about it a while back, and we're actually co-investors in several deals together. So, in terms of the company that was mentioned earlier, SpotShotter, that company, I mean, the U.S. government has advised those of us who do deals with the U.S. government not to invest in it. And I believe that their largest investor, if you want to rattle it off, I know you had it at hand.
I have
Their
it at
large,
hand anymore.
yeah, their largest investor, I believe, was hit by the SEC recently for financial malfeasance. So, look, there is a concerted effort by the part of a lot of Republicans and by a lot of others to have a sort of binational security state with Israel and the United States sharing intelligence. This comes out of post 9/11 period. U.S. and Israel were highly aligned on a number of company formation, number of sort of security agreements. CIA people serving on Israeli boards, Israeli folks serving on companies that were American defense related. A lot of that relationship is breaking down now. You could look at something that then Vice President Biden is reported to have said about the Stuxnet virus, about how the Israelis went too far. You can also look at Gantz and others. Naftali Bennett has, of course, promised that there's going to be a full accounting of the way in which the Netanyahu government used a lot of controversial technologies to spy on dissidents and journalists, and
Well,
of course,
Netanyahu is obviously very corrupt. He's under indictment in his own country. So,
correct. So the question right now is whether or not the Israeli state is actually going to punish him and others who are engaged in essentially a spying for hire kind of business with a lot of corrupt governments around the world, or whether or not that's going to be allowed to skate by. And the news from around the world, the tech news from around the world, is that there are a lot of countries that are super pissed that their prime ministers and presidents and others were hacked, and there are also a lot of Americans who are pissed. A
I
lot of people
understand all of that, but this whole thing with the SEC and that firm, whatever it was, every major financial firm in this country has been fined by the SEC at some point for something. Every single one of them.
I don't know that I'd go that far, but
Yeah.
I take your point that the SEC does do a lot of regulations, but I think it's worth mentioning that that's an issue. And look, I don't want to belabor this point, but we do have an issue here where a lot of people are funding either through their pension funds or through endowments or through various organizations that they're affiliated with. Sometimes wittingly, sometimes unwittingly, they're funding weapons and weapon systems that are coming under review, and I think they should be. I mean, if you look at some of the cases here of various journalists, dissidents, politicians who've been jailed or killed, I mean, the Khashoggi matter is really grotesque. And we should be sort of mindful on the fact that NSO, the NSO company, said, that when Saudi Arabia was misusing the technology, they wanted to discontinue Saudi's use of the technology. And of course, by their admission and by other reporting that's out there, both in the UK press and the American press, the Israeli government under Netanyahu said, "Hey, you guys need to continue selling this technology to Saudi Arabia." I mean, it's pretty damning, and there's a reason Edward Snowden calls this the scandal of the year, which is it's quite something. And there's a reason members of Congress are getting involved, and the FBI is involved. I mean, none of those things are good for long-term peaceful relations between countries. And if we're sitting in a world in which each of us are on an iPhone, and essentially what the end reveal of the NSO technology, the end reveal of it is that essentially none of our private communications on cell phones are not, subject to review by foreign governments, many of whom with with difficult human rights records. I mean, that's just kind of where we are right now. And I understand that that might be difficult for those of us who want peaceful relations, and
Another
and so forth.
maybe another
But that's a
another way to look at it is that countries develop technologies for military reasons that then get repurposed for the commercial landscape, which I assume Pegasus came from that kind of situation where it was being used internally for defense purposes, which you can imagine, that would be incredibly useful way to use that system. And then for it to become a private company that becomes commercialized, I don't know that I fault that either. That's incredibly valuable technology that other countries are going to want to use. And this one that I was just reading, Active Fence, my guess is, and I have no knowledge to think this, it's a wild conspiracy theory. Self-admittedly, I'm proposing an incredibly wild conspiracy theory that technologies like that, the way that they're phrasing it, I would love to look inside to see how it's really working, because Israel proportion a lot of the innovations that come from the leading innovations, mind-blowing innovations, they deserve an incredible amount of credit. Now, I mean, uh,
no, they're the best. I mean,
this
let's
is
just
my
be frank
point: is
about this, with some
they've
exceptions
got
here and
these
there, but
golden
they are the
eggs.
best.
Why not make some golden omelets? Like, why not? Why keep it for only the use case of national defense? Why not commercialize it? I mean, this is what governments do all the time. This is what universities do all the time. Is there's innovations that happen and it gets commercialized.
Well,
If
in the case of NSO, right? I mean, there's an article here. Israel's NSO group links to hacking tool pitched to U.S. police. And the company in question is named Westbridge. And for those of us who are Americans here, um, Westbridge was the U.S. based affiliate of NSO Group. NSO Group spent millions of dollars pitching it to law enforcement throughout the United States, which essentially ends your Fourth Amendment rights. I mean, if the government has your cell phone number, that's it's sort of done. And so they tried to pitch it to Tony Blinken's advisory company. They of course turned it down. But we have former U.S. senators that are lobbyists for this company. The company's under
So
FBI
long story
investigation. I
short,
mean, it's
yeah, but long story short,
it's pretty
yeah, but
serious.
now we understand why China says, "Thank you, no, thank you. We don't want none of your technology companies here. We'll build it all ourselves." And I imagine what this will lead to. Things like Pegasus will lead to the U.S. saying, "You know what? We're just going to have to." If you're an American company and you're doing anything with digital security, cybersecurity, you must use. Here's the list of approved, you know, companies that you can work with. Similar to how I imagine how it works in China, where it's like, no, you can't use non-Chinese cybersecurity companies in China. Or you see what I'm saying? This starts to
And
become
look,
a
there.
nationalization of the tech stack, so to speak.
Yes, and in the case of the U.S., I mean, those of us who do national security related deals, there are a whole bunch of deals which we're not allowed to touch or even like take meetings with people without getting pre-clearance from our government minders. So I mean that the sort of nationalization of tech is sort of like a very underexplored thing, and for countries that are smaller countries that want to sell to larger markets, i.e., the United States or China or India or elsewhere, you're starting to see a real pushback of those countries to have spyware into their systems.
It's going to be, well, I think there's a massive decoupling on all kinds of fronts, but it's interesting that the tech uh, is a kind of a non-obvious part of that. Because yeah, the beauty of kind of the web is how it was all one big, all everything that the ones and zeros kind of just flow amongst one massive cloud, with the exception of China, and now it's starting to be balkanized essentially.
Right. This idea that basically you can build something and 0 to 1 style distribute software with zero marginal cost to anyone on the planet is still probably true. But whether or not those countries will allow you to do it is sort of another thing entirely. And witness, like, a lot of African countries are banning Facebook and Twitter. right around election time because they don't want to see it used to basically inflame racial tensions or racial and ethnic tensions. So this idea of basically a global tech company, I think, might be something we tell our grandchildren about.
Well, I think
I
I
think it's
think
very
I think
unlikely
America
that
was in favor of it as long as we were on the main benefactor side of it with Google and Facebook and Apple, kind of becoming, the really big peak of that hierarchy, of that pyramid. But now that that's been achieved, and maybe now that it looks like the race is going in a different direction, we're gonna divert course or something.
Well, there's a major danger too if you think of like a global company. Let's say you're Mark Zuckerberg and you're the only person who makes decisions about acquisitions, right? At a multi-hundred billion dollar company, that's a real issue. Like you could go and compromise Mark Zuckerberg, or you could go and like placate him in some sort of way if you're an intelligence service of another country and get him to buy things that he shouldn't be buying. And I think we've seen, we saw Jeffrey Epstein hanging around with Bill Gates. And there's all sorts of questions of Epstein's ties to all kinds of intelligence services all around the world, including whether or not he was an FBI informant, which is another sort of interesting question. So I think we should just be very mindful of the antitrust arguments here against some of these American tech companies are also at play on national security questions.
It's going to be interesting. So, India, 16 unicorns, $11 billion in funding. Indian startups rise. From businessstandard.com, not heard of that one. It says the great Indian tech startup stories being written amid the COVID-19 pandemic as traditional sectors still bear the brunt. That's true pretty much everywhere. We talked about the $15 billion lost by EdTech. Powder Technologies could help distribute vaccine protection against COVID-19 using an inhaler, from the BBC. Researchers are looking at easier ways for people to get the vaccine, including via inhalers and and that would be fantastic, especially even after COVID. If we're designing all these drugs, it would be great if they were tablets. Anyway, January 2021, desperate man attempts to unlock $300 million in Bitcoin, $303 million in Bitcoin. And the desperate man has 2 password attempts left to unlock his crypto wallet holding $303 million. He wrote the Bitcoin code on a piece of paper that he has lost. And he better find it before, or he's going to lose $300 million. The top wind and solar countries, percent of electricity produced from wind and solar in the 2020. This turns to our next edition of Tech Jeopardy, everybody. Welcome. Step right up. Can you name the top 15 wind and solar countries as a percentage of electricity production from wind and solar in 2020?
I say somewhere near the Nordics, near the top.
Yes. Go ahead and be a little more specific.
Norway.
No. Holland ranks about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10th. Denmark's number 1. There you go, Lakeisha. Denmark's huge on wind, by the way. Like absolutely tremendous. This is for wind and solar. They're not that big on solar, but they're so big in wind that even combining wind and solar, they're still a country mile ahead of everybody. Second place is, by the way, Denmark is 61% renewable energy for their electricity.
Is Spain?
Spain's number 5 at 29%, tied with the UK, just above Greece at 27, Portugal at 26, followed by Belgium, Netherlands, Italy, Sweden, Chile, Austria, and Romania. Number 1 being Denmark at 61%, Uruguay second at 44%, followed by Ireland at 35, Germany at 33, and then you get into Spain and the UK and Greece and Portugal and everybody else. And that's a whole lot of wind for Denmark. And you can see the propellers off the coast of Copenhagen when you fly between Copenhagen, if you ever go in or out of Copenhagen. Anyway, first came the ransomware attacks, now come the lawsuits, is the headline from the Washington Post. That's literally the headline. And it's talking about companies that have been locked out of their computer networks by hackers are now getting sued by consumers and workers claiming they were hurt by lax cybersecurity. Good times. From the Washington Post, also, companies are now telling their employees, according to the Washington Post, that their bosses are giving them ultimatums to either report to work, quit, or be fired. My boss is allowing parents of school-aged children to continue working remotely, but is ordering us older parents back to the office if we want to continue working with the company.
Which companies are doing this?
Good question. The New York City just required all New York City employees to be vaccinated, including teachers. And now California is drafting legislation to mimic New York. And the report, it says parents of young children. I will tweet this Washington Post article out. It probably names some companies to answer that question. I don't have a list of company names handy.
And what should be if you get a lawsuit over, is basically the idea that you'd be sued for having lax security at your firm? Is that basically the idea on the ransomware question?
Well, that, I guess,
so,
from there was two. It says the consumers, meaning the customers, and the workers claiming they were hurt by cybersecurity. It's a Washington Post. Let's see. Does it? No, it's paywalled. So I'm not able to get into the details on that one, but I tweeted it out. The next one up is what is behind China's crackdown on its tech giants. China's biggest companies got that way with at least tacit support from the government, which took a relatively hands-off approach towards the big internet giants, and now it's kind of reversing tack. And Bloomberg now asking itself what everyone's asking themselves: what exactly is going on with the China cracking down on all of the tech companies, including their biggest tech unicorns? It's a really interesting question indeed. And Amazon will investigate gender bias claims in its cloud division. And U.S. stocks hit record highs, with the Dow breaching 35,000 even as Delta variant concerns grow. And in fact, probably because Delta concerns grow, because if there's one thing we learned during the first wave of the pandemic, is that tech companies made a killing. And there's a lot of money to be made in digitizing things when people are not able to go to their offices. And so Delta might be the best thing that happened to the stock market now that it's being led by a lot of tech companies. And Tesla rewrote its own software to survive the chip shortage, is the headline from The Verge. The global chip shortage situation remains quite serious, Tesla says, but you can optimize with software when possible. And then speaking of COVID, the Indianapolis Colts coach named Frank Reich tests positive for COVID-19 despite being vaccinated. The question is, which company's vaccines did you use? I'm fortunate to be fully vaccinated and I'm asymptomatic, he said in a statement. I'm feeling well and I'm looking forward to returning as soon as I'm medically cleared. And next Monday is the earliest he can return, Colts general manager.
By the way, one of my friends who owns a COVID testing company tells me this is a common thing that's happening, where people who are vaccinated are increasingly testing positive for COVID-19, but that those people tend to have mild symptoms, in general. But I do wonder in the U.S. how likely it will be before we have vaccine passports, which is something I've resisted investing in companies that do it. I've resisted taking meetings with companies that do it, and very much philosophically oppose it for health reasons, and having had family members and others who've had vaccine injuries for other vaccines in the past, and because we're all genetically quite different from each other, this idea of one size fits all does not make a lot of sense. And for those who think it does, I direct them to the fact that the FDA said for many years that opioids were not addictive. Or we can point to other examples of the FDA getting it wildly wrong or being corrupt. So I tend to be very skeptical here, but I'm curious, do we think a vaccine passport is going to be mandatory in the West?
That's a
what is that going to
whole
look like?
room into itself. Well, when you say the West, the France just approved it yesterday, so it's needed.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, factually, the UK is effectively implementing it now, right? So nightclubs for
I
kids.
think it's not a West issue. I think the U.S. is quite unique in its strong, kind of libertarian strain is uniquely strong in the U.S., where I think Europe will be.
So if the state requires you to do it, and you have basically there's no recourse, right? If there's a adverse reaction. I mean, these people who have had blood clots and had other issues, you're just shit out of luck. Is that the idea, or how does it
I
work
don't
in
think
these
the
other
U.S. is
countries?
going to require shots. That's a different issue than require.
France is not even requiring
No,
shots. They're
nobody's
just basically saying you can't go to a restaurant unless
have a
you're proof of
passport.
vaccinated. But
Right.
you
Got
can
it.
stay in your own home. They're not going to require
Got
you to
it.
get a
Got it.
shot.
But you
It
can
is
go
it is
out to
sort
eat
of
in
it's
Huntington Beach. I don't know if you all saw, there is a restaurant in Huntington Beach that said that patrons have to prove that they have not been vaccinated in order to enter that particular restaurant. But to your earlier point, Charles, I don't know that any of the vaccines guarantee that people will not contract COVID. I think that what they do is they lessen the effects and they keep people off of respirators and ventilators and, hopefully protect people from dying.
The
Right. I mean,
and
Eric Clapton
so
also says he refuses to play any concert that discriminates against people on the basis of having a vaccine passport or to show evidence of their vaccine status.
Because he had a bad reaction to the
Oh,
AstraZeneca
did he?
vaccine. That's where that comes from.
I
Yeah,
didn't know
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Well, I think I had a very bad reaction. I took the Moderna, and then I was sick for a week. Especially the second day. Oh my God! I actually thought I got COVID really well. I guess the vaccination is giving you a small dose of the virus. I was shivering. I was very sick. I couldn't eat. I had just a killer headache, and I was told only to take Tylenol, nothing else, because it has a reaction, I guess, with the vaccination. But I would still take it again, just personally, because I mean, I have seen family members, one actually couple who died, and also my sister-in-law who has been sick. She's one of the long haulers who has now a long-term issue because she has a scar in her lung. She has, blood clot in her lung. So I understand it's a personal choice, but what I'm wondering is, don't we all do, like, for a public good? For example, you can't drink and drive, right? We wear seatbelts and we do many other things because of the public good, and also endangering the lives of others. And I think, from my understanding, what some governments are doing, it is not mandating it, but they're just making it a bit difficult for others not to spread it by making it much more convenient for vaccinated people. I think that's what I see what happening in
it
different
is
places,
surprising
but
to me that
it's
we've
my
not.
feeling.
It's
Yeah, go
interesting
ahead.
that we have not genetically sequenced the whole population because, like in my family, so I have 4 times the likelihood of getting venous thromboembolism as the general population, and it's something that runs in my family, which is a sort of blood clotting disease. So there have been adverse reactions, and there for people who've had the same kind of variants that I've had. But rather than genetically sequencing everyone, which is essentially cheap and free, the attitude has been that we need to just shoot everyone up with an experimental vaccines or a series of experimental vaccines for which there's no liability, if the manufacturers are wrong. And so my sort of criticism of this is, this rationalization of one size fits all doesn't seem to work for all sorts of things. And I think we need to be very mindful here of sort of thinking of other public policy outcomes than sort of shaming or harming people who don't get vaccinated. And it was interesting. I spoke with 23andMe when this sort of started up because there had been a number of genome-wide associated studies that had shown that there's a genetic predisposition for the people who get very likely of getting COVID and dying. And I ultimately, made my own website. It's on my profile, covidforecaster.com, for those of you who've done 23andMe or Ancestry, where you can upload your data and see your own, likelihood of getting the various diseases, various sort of worse forms of the disease. And it's interesting, 23andMe did not want to publish this, nor did Ancestry, nor did some others, until they were sort of shamed by the scientific community to help people make their own determinations as to their risk. So I do think in some of these countries where you don't necessarily have the ability to do a genome-wide, full population study, but when you have a single-payer healthcare system in a lot of the Nordic countries and elsewhere, I think it's really sort of unconscionable that they're not using $100, $50 genetic tests to see like who's likely to have an adverse reaction. I think
Is the answer to
it's
that
kind of
anything
good.
straightforward, Charles? In that, what are the chances of re-election of any state leader that suggests mass genetic sequencing of the entire population?
Well, you mentioned, I see from your flag there that you're from the UK, and Matt Hancock, I guess your newly departed health
Yeah.
secretary. He was one of the first gentlemen to call for sequencing every child born in the UK, and I'm not sure what the
Yep.
status of that as is right now. And obviously, I wouldn't recommend making out with your secretaries and keeping your job if you want to sequence the whole population ahead of time. But I don't know what the new guy's position is on this. But there is a sort of like larger question here of to what extent is the state obliged to know your vaccine status? To what extent is the state obliged to know your fuller genetic status? And I don't really see a world in which you sort of accept the government can shoot you up with something that it just decides that works. And remember, there have been no longitudinal studies on these sorts of things. And even like if you go back and you look at the early mRNA discussions that were taking place at DARPA, there was this question about long-term effects. So I think we need to be very mindful of sort of have a precautionary approach here. But I can understand that reasonable people can disagree on this question. I just want to make the devil's
Charles, is there
advocate
a place
argument.
people can go to? They can take 23andMe and then upload it on your thing, and then that you'll look.
Yeah. I did this as a public service, covidforecaster.com. It's in my profile. And for those of you, there are, given that there's over 400 people here and it's a representative sample pretty much of the world, or relatively speaking, certainly the English speaking world, then, for those of you who are of Indian heritage, for example, you will have a much higher risk of contracting the really bad COVID that could kill you. And so, if you're older, you have other pre-existing conditions, I highly recommend you get vaccinated. But those of you who are younger or come from certain other populations, you'll carry a lower risk. And so it's sort of I wanted people to be informed when they made the decision for themselves and their family. And given that a lot of people have already done personal genomics work, I thought that would be a sort of public service I could offer. And I think we are now up to 29,000 people that have done it, and I won't use the test for anything else. And it deletes after a while on my own servers, so I think it's a 6 month sort of thing that we keep it for. But in any event, if those of you are interested, and those of you who've done other tests beyond 23andMe or have your genomes done from some other service, if you want to email me, I'm happy to help you. Just because I think it's something that if I could help one person not have an adverse reaction, either way, to COVID or to the vaccine, I'm happy to do it.
Okay, so
Just
we're going.
oh, go ahead, Ted.
I just got to run through these headlines real quick. Speaking of COVID, some things to keep in mind. New York Times is reporting QR codes are here to stay. Thanks to COVID, so is the tracking they allow, fueled by a desire for touchless transactions. QR codes popped up everywhere during the pandemic. Businesses don't want to give them up, but it also comes with the ability for people are now going to be hacked and unknowingly expose themselves to all kinds of things through QR codes. For example, how hackers normally get into your phone is they send you a link that you click on. Well, a QR code is exactly that. It's you clicking on a link, essentially. So just by scanning the code, you've now essentially infected yourself if it's a malicious QR code. So just as an example. And then also related to the pandemic of sorts is this article from The Guardian that says virtual contact, meaning video calls. Virtual contact is worse than no contact for people over 60 years old. That are also in lockdown. I don't know if that means if it's true if they're not in lockdown, but it says studying in touch with friends and family via technology made many older people feel more lonely. So don't call grandma. No video calls for grandma, no. And the EU gives Google 2 months to improve its hotel flight and search results or face sanctions. And they have 2 months to improve the way it presents internet search results for flights and hotels and explain how it ranks these or face possible sanctions, the EU Commission and EU Commissioner Authority said on Monday. And Box.com, which is sort of a competitor to Dropbox, you could think of it if you don't know what Box is, now has e-signature collections, which has also boomed as a result of COVID, obviously doing business and signing documents remotely. Like telemedicine, one of the kind of thankfully booming areas is virtual signatures. And then here's another one. All of these were all actually tied to COVID. Virtual office startup called TeamFlow raises $35 million to bring informal collaboration to hybrid work. What it is Teams, it's just a website where teams can collaborate. Like, it's actually what it is it's Clubhouse, but with a physical room that you move your icon around the room and you sit at a table together to join the room. And then there's another room you can move your icon into the other room, which is like an office with a whiteboard. And then you can see where the other team members are and what rooms they're in and which meetings they're in. It's kind of adds a graphic user interface to Clubhouse, basically. And it's called TeamFlow, and those types of apps will continue to raise money, especially as Delta is kicking up again. All this remote working is just going to get easier and easier and easier. And there was even somebody tweeted in an HR outsourcing outfit to make it easy to build teams and do HR for all your new remote workers and everything. And there is another 20 some hours of headlines I need to plow through from all the tweets that everyone's sending in, but we have got to take a break so that I can eat something.
Hey, Tyler, can I ask you something very quickly? How's the coffee-free
That
session
was
going?
not, that was,
It
that
doesn't
was
sound
rough.
any different.
That was rough. It was hard.
But from our, I don't know if anybody else, but Cheryl sensed, I didn't sense any difference. So it's good for you if you could cope with it.
Yeah.
We'll see. Okay.
So you didn't have it at all?
No.
You didn't give up?
Right.
Oh,
yeah.
Great. Congrats.
Yeah, but we're going to meet again in 4 hours and 10 minutes.
See you guys.
Okay, so we will see